And welcome to Killer POV, episode number 70. I'm one of your hosts, Rob G, from FEARnet and Icons of Fright.
Blood! Mother blood!
That number's not quite as sexy as it was last week.
No. That is Elric Kane, Inside Horror. Teacher of children.
Ex-teacher, well, for now, yeah.
For now.
My summer's over. Now I'm just guardian of child.
And I have another, and actually, it only took 70 episodes, but Elric, for the first time in the history of the show, brought beer instead of me bringing the beer.
I had to text him and remind him.
No, that's true.
Yeah, in fairness. And he responded like, what beer?
I mean,
I don't think I responded at all.
Occasionally,
I don't think you did, actually.
And last but not least, that is Rebekah McKendry, who was looking out for my drinking. What are you doing here
I'm
for?
just doing what the fans at home are doing. I'm just echoing the audience point of view.
They're in their like cars driving going,
Why are you wearing the shirt? Oh, good.
I am wearing the shirt.
She's wearing a Doris Wishman shirt.
Yeah.
Which is very cool.
I like it.
I've always wanted a Doris Wishman shirt 'cause she's one of my favorite filmmakers, and Elric found one for me.
He did something nice for you?
Well, not on purpose. I stumbled upon it. I would never go out of my way.
And then he emailed it to me, and he was like, here's a shirt, fuckface. You might want to try it.
Yeah.
And
wow.
Yeah.
I don't think I used those words, but
it's close enough.
He didn't.
I like the flourish, though. I think she gave it.
Thank you.
We just lost lots of sponsors. Fuckface. We're no longer on airlines. Thank you. United Airlines just dropped us because of fuckface. But that's okay.
Man,
we're here for other reasons. We're here to celebrate the birth of Alfred Hitchcock. Definitely takes priority over Rob, but very close to Alfred Hitchcock is Rob G.
Within the top five.
But your birthday isn't today, right?
It will be when this airs.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, here's to the future.
Right
here's to the future now.
We're in the future.
The future is now.
And we still have treats to come up later tonight.
Treats are coming later. It's
treats.
Amazing. All right.
I have brought treats.
Well, we get to do a Psycho/Hitchcock episode, which I'm excited about. I've always wanted to do Psycho ones.
And Psycho ripoffs.
And Psycho ripoffs.
I want to throw
That's
them in
what
there.
You were really excited
about.
Well,
because it did change. It is the film.
He just wants to talk about Dress to Kill again.
Contemporary slasher films. I will talk about that.
That's funny because you posted a thing on my page about Psycho today, and I posted a picture of myself as mother, and then Elric immediately posted his picture dressed up as his Dress to Kill.
I can never remember her name. I always try to remember that character's female name, and I always forget it.
I've done it too. I've dressed as a slasher. Oh, I did Ms. 45 at Halloween, kind of a slasher.
Gun.
She's got a gun.
She didn't use a knife, did she?
No, just a gun straight. It was Ms. 45, so it was a 45 the whole time.
Definitely, I wouldn't have thought of that film as a slasher, but I would put it in the Psycho ripoff variety because it's certainly that kind of psychosis. It's like there with Repulsion with the female gender switch versions of that, which tend to be a little more interesting.
Yeah, Killer Nun does that, and there's a few others that are kind of fun.
Well,
we'll get to that.
Speaking of Psycho, hey, Psycho ripoffs leads right into what I've seen this week. I have been revisiting Brian De Palma, the king of...
Can I underscore your entire conversation?
Sure you can if you want. No, I've been, it's funny because I saw a lot of De Palma stuff when I was younger growing up, and I never had a taste for it at the time. I always just thought it was Hitchcock ripoff stuff. But that's like, you see something that looks like the shower scene and you're like, wait a minute, this is like that other movie. But now that I'm older, I picked up all his earlier films on Blu-ray and I've been revisiting them all, and just such an appreciation for them now as films. I think, I can't remember if it was you, Elric, or my friend Mike C. I was watching Blowout the other day. And he's like, dude, it's pure. He's pure cinema, pure cinema. And considering how he shoots things and the sound design and especially executing that movie in particular, I get it. It's all very, very cinematic.
And sometimes it comes off as contrived because of that. Sometimes, when it doesn't work, it's contrived. And when it works, it's pure cinema. Mm-hmm. Like Snake Eyes, I watched that and it's like, it doesn't matter how much I want to like a movie like that. You might like it because it's fun or something, but it feels just so much like you're always reminded you're watching a movie. Always. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, oh no, here's a clever shot. Whereas when in moments of blow up or Dress to Kill, there's moments it's just like you're along for the ride.
Yeah. I haven't gotten to Snake Eyes yet, but the film I saw this week was Turn Back. I saw The Fury, which I had never seen before.
I haven't seen it either. That's one I've owned it for years. I've never watched it.
Watch it immediately.
Okay.
It's really great. Like within the first 5 minutes, Kurt Douglas, John Cassavetes,
Chicago Beach.
I mean, the opening sequence right off the bat is just so good. And then it sets up the whole movie. And then later you have Amy Irving, who looks fantastic in high def, especially like young Amy Irving.
And the greatest American independent filmmaker of all time as a villain, John Cassavetes. Doesn't get much better than that, I think. I think it's really fun. His comeuppance is amazing at the end.
I'm not too into Cassavetes films, so at least yet. So I've only seen him as a villain and everything.
Wow.
Essentially. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Dirty Dozen and things like that. He was a hero.
Yeah. But I really love the movie. It's got the only thing I could say about it, because it's essentially, Kirk Douglas is on the hunt for his son, who has this psychic ability and has been kidnapped by John Cassavetes, who is trying to use this, was it like a government thing? I can't remember the specifics.
I think it was. I haven't seen it for a while either.
Yeah, they were essentially trying to train these psychic people to do things for them, very naughty things. But what I thought was amazing was this movie's totally Scanners, or at least it's the biggest influence on Scanners I could think of. And sure enough, I looked it up, and this was, late 70s, and Scanners is 82. So I theorized that Cronenberg either saw this or read the book and decided to explain it, because there's no real explanation for the psychic. It's just some people are psychic in the movie or have psychic abilities. So,
but that's true in Chicago.
Oh,
that's just a Chicago thing.
Yeah.
You're listening in Chicago. You already know I said this.
Yeah, I strongly recommend it, and it's got one of the greatest endings. I think it's the best De Palma ending of any of his films
Pretty
ever.
damn awesome.
Elric texted me in the middle of it and was just like, "It's insane,
Wait till the ending." Yeah,
and then ... insane, all caps.
Yeah.
And when I thought the last 10 minutes were great, and then you meant like the last few moments.
Yeah, it's really the very end of the film.
It was so, like, my roommate happened to walk by and we both started laughing out loud hysterically because it was awesome, and replayed it. We're like, that was amazing.
Okay.
If you love Rosemary's Baby and you always wanted Guy to get his comeuppance, this is the film where he gets his comeuppance.
You get to see it, yeah. So in that regard,
it is a cool movie though. It's fun.
Definitely great. So that's all right. So I saw The Fury. What did you guys see?
I'll start with my house update. So I had the creepy thing with
is this the HGV channel suddenly?
I know, but no, I have to talk about this just because this is the creepy.
What did you find this week?
I did not tell anybody ahead of time because I wanted to talk about it on the show. So I'm under the house checking the plumbing this week. And this, I'm seriously debating going to the cops.
Oh, shit.
Under the house, we found a shoebox full of assorted keys.
Huh.
And I don't mean like keys to the house. I mean like key rings full of keys.
Huh.
Dozens of them.
That's
if this was
weird.
Dexter, we would call these trophies.
I like trophies.
I'm actually creeped out by that picture.
I'm creeped out as hell.
And the one with blood on it is weird. and DNA samples
so right
of
now,
hair.
I'm showing the guys a picture.
Ooh,
of
imagine
the
if
keys.
each one had a thread of hair, just one thread of
Oh my
hair
God.
running through as a chain.
Do you know who you bought the house off of?
It was the guy. His parents lived there in the 60s. They died in the 90s, and he's been renting it for the past 15 years.
Who rented it before you?
I have no idea. It's been vacant for 2 years, and then he'd been renting it for 15 years.
Did you start with
prior.
them asking, we found these keys or not?
We don't know him.
Just
I mean,
in case.
that's how you buy houses.
No,
now.
but
You
if
don't
he was a
communicate.
killer, he would
would've
remove
taken
that
them
box.
with him.
So
Unless
it could be
he met
doesn't
an
know
early
that.
demise.
Exactly. Maybe I want to know the history. All right.
Oh, he might have died.
One, stop publicly
Or
talking about
he
this.
got arrested.
I'll bet
And
you
go-
any money somebody's buried under the jacuzzi because they have a jacuzzi.
Yeah,
which
there's a jacuzzi
makes
in the
me
backyard.
think, and that's where you put bodies. You bury them under the concrete jacuzzi.
Stay tuned for next week. Hopefully we will find out.
Can we
what's
become a
going to
murder mystery show? That gets a lot more ratings.
So this is kind of creepy, but I had to share it on here first.
Wow.
So aside from that,
I would definitely tell the cops about that. That's weird.
it's a little weird. I know. We're kind of debating
Box
what
of
to do.
keys.
So yeah, it's creepy.
All right.
But anyway, so then after that, I went to the midnight screening of Motel Hell, which was awesome. It was a beautiful print, just a super fun movie. It never gets old. It was a print, as far as I know, because somebody in the audience asked, "Where did you get the print?"
Well, no, because there was a beautiful print that it could be the one I saw, which is like literally the best print I've seen of any movie. But then I just assumed because it's a new release that it might have been a DCP thing.
I'm not sure.
might have
It
been. No,
looked
you've been-
gorgeous,
yeah.
and it was at Cinefamily. So
It's the only
assumed
time
print.
in my life I've seen a film print, if it's the same one I saw in LA, and where I couldn't see anything that would tip off that's a film print. There was I couldn't see grain. I couldn't see, like on the sides, I didn't see any cigarette burn. I just remember watching going, oh wow, this must be DCP. It looks amazing. But
I know it's a print because it did have cigarette burns.
okay, yeah, so it's
I
a
know
print.
it did.
So which is really cool because but when I was watching, I was just like, oh my God, how does a print restore like this.
Yeah, I did note the cigarette burn in one scene. So that was definitely a print. So
Great movie.
that was fun. And then Fango did a screening of this film called Possession of Michael King, which I have to, like, when Fango does these screenings, a lot of time we set them up as like a cross promotion with the studios. And a lot of times I don't get to see them in advance. I just have to show up and, like, you know, talk to the filmmakers and do a Q&A and things like that. So this was my first time seeing it was with everybody else, which was a lot of fun. The film was found footage, which I tend to hate, but I kind of liked this one. It definitely had some genuinely creepy moments. It did one thing that drives me crazy where it does jump scares solely with audio. So it's like you're sitting there and your ears are bleeding just because they just make this loud bass come through all of a sudden. And so that it's a cheap scare.
You know, when I love that, the only time I've ever just loved that is the opening chord of Insidious.
Yes.
I think that's the coolest thing ever.
That works
because it hasn't, you're not in the movie yet, and it's telling you this is what the movie is.
Oh, right
I
off
love
the
it.
bat.
I love that moment.
Yeah.
In contemporary horror, I think that's one of my favorite moments, actually.
I mean, the film was genuinely creepy without it, but there were a couple of times when, like, I was sitting next to Brian Collins and he was actually, like, grabbing his ears. And
because of the sound.
Because of the sound. It was so intense.
And everyone's wired differently with sound. Some people are really sensitive.
Yeah.
Other people...
It hurt. There were times that it hurt. And so I recommend kind of riding the remote when you watch it, but there's genuinely creepy stuff in it that's worth it. So
how does it differ from other possession movies?
And found footage films, like why?
The approach, and I can talk about this because it's all laid out within the first 5 minutes. It's a found footage film, and it's about a guy whose wife has passed away, and his wife she believed in spiritualism, she believed in psychics and demonology and all this stuff. And so, and it eventually led to her death through course of events that, you know, was not in any way the psychic's fault. But he becomes obsessed with it and decides that for the next couple of weeks, he's going to do everything he can to prove if demonology is real. So he starts like doing seances and does tries to get possessed by a demon, tries to do an invocation, does necromancy, everything. And it's just kind of like what eventually happens to him along the way.
That reminds me of that film, the short anthology one that you passed along to me that I loved, the last one, where she has to finally draw the pentagram to get her son. She's tried everything to get her son to come back. The end of
Dead of Night.
Yeah, I like those stories, like where somebody's just trying anything out of desperation.
Yeah.
I think it's quite a believable idea. That if you lost something that you couldn't imagine, that you might go to desperate lengths.
Yeah, and so he's just literally like going through a book saying demonology, necromancy, Ouija board, and just doing them all across the board, trying to see what will work, and if any of it's real. And what he discovers is a couple of them are real, and it just kind of spirals his life out. But yeah, that's all kind of revealed in the.
Do you know
first
anything
10
about
minutes.
the filmmaker? Is it?
I know it's LA. He's in LA. It's his first film. He had a private backer, and so.
And how is the found footage justified?
That the guy's like documenting it along the way. And I say this about all found footage films. It would have been a more powerful film if you had just turned the camera slightly to the left and shot it as an actual feature.
Right.
Because the found footage, I mean, these guys were using high quality films. I'm fairly sure they were shooting on Reds. And so when you have that type of capabilities and you're still setting it up as a found footage, it seems just like a script cop out. Like, we couldn't find a way to write actual dialogue, so we're going to have them talking to the camera.
Yeah, I got to say, that is the one thing I mentioned last week that did impress me about Oculus. I'm sure it came up that somebody would have said, why don't we just do a found footage? I'm sure it would have come up when it was being discussed, just because it has that element within the story, and the fact that it's not as great.
Documenting it in the story.
It's nice to see people set up cameras and push record, but not see the footage.
It's kind of like you could have, and I mean, this is 1980s early. You could have done Poltergeist as a found footage film very clearly because they had, a whole documentary crew there,
or at least the second half. See, that I would be more interested in people taking the approach of like the first half's normal, and then the second half the crew come in, and from there on it's something else.
Blair Witch 2 did that.
The Entity could have had that. The Entity really, the second half of The Entity, I think the first half of The Entity is like one of the scariest horror films ever made. It really gets me. But the second half, it's just people investigating stuff, and it's not quite as interesting. But
this, like most found footage films, did irk me in the presentation because of the found footage element where, he opens the film by addressing where the camera is, and then all of a sudden we've got like 15 different angles from where it's being shot from, and you're like, man, does he have like 15 cameras? And it's on such high quality. Not that I would watch it if it was a low quality film, but really, if you're using cameras that are that good, just fucking write a
Make a movie.
narrative.
If I was you, I'd make a short critiquing found footage films because it sounds like you have a lot of rage.
I think I might.
If I was you, that's what I would do. I would
I'd call it found.
I'd call it
would
found,
too.
and you should cast Darren Bowsman and AJ Bowen, both who don't like found footage films.
Oh my gosh!
Wouldn't that
I
be funny?
might play it in a couple of weeks
a good
at
idea.
a screening in LA.
If
What
you
can I
can,
say?
Smokes.
if you
I'll
can,
have
the
to,
worlds are
bust butt to
colliding.
get it done. So, but on the found footage thing, the last film I watched this week, aside from copious amounts of Shark Week, the last actual film I watched this week is so many of our filmmaker or our fans had texted me about seeing Lake Mungo.
Oh, you know what? I just downloaded that too because of our fans, and I didn't start watching. I think I watched the opening credits, and I had to do something else. So.
I am anxious to see what you say because I had to stop 25 minutes in because the first 25 minutes are made entirely out of B-roll, and it's killing me.
But so many people have mentioned it.
It said it's great. And the first 20 minutes, it's literally voiceover interviews of people talking about this girl drowning and B-roll of the freaking town. And I'm like, I've seen so many cows and barns and sheeps and,
Don't
people
criticize
driving.
Australia.
Yeah.
What a beautiful...
It's a lovely countryside. It really is. But
You're mad,
seriously,
you bastard.
You gotta,
the whole thing, it worked like a travel log with this voiceover of them talking about how sad it was this girl has drowned.
Okay, Rob hasn't seen it
And
yet.
so I don't know if I need to make it just past the first 25
How about I
minutes for it to
challenge
get
you
good.
by next week we have to both watch the whole thing.
Okay.
And then we will discuss it on air when we have given it its fair due. Because clearly maybe it goes somewhere really interesting.
I'm hoping so.
It's found footage?
It is. Well, it's documentary style. It's set up like The Bay, where it's like, here's the actual news footage from the event.
Weird.
So then it's like we're watching Channel 5 news footage of, and they're interviewing people and talking to people on the scene after this girl's drowned. And that's as far as I got because I was like, I swear, 25 minutes in, I'm still looking at idyllic streams, and occasionally they do a medium close up of somebody talking, and then it would just go back to travelogue footage. So
I'm willing to take the challenge.
I will try to make it past it, and who knows? Next week I may come back in and say it's the greatest film I've ever seen. It's an underground gem I missed, but
then it would have to be better than Last Boy Scout for it to be the greatest film.
That's not an underground gem.
Okay, it is to me. Just quickly, I didn't see much. I don't know what happened. I watched a lot of. I was catching up on a lot of TV. I was a big fan of that show, The Killing, especially the third season of it, which I really liked. Where Elias Koteas is in it, and there's some really good. It's like a serial killer storyline, so it was much more heightened than the other two seasons. So I guess Netflix paid the bill to do the finale, and the actual show was good. But I've never seen this before in my life. But anyone listening, I won't spoil it. But the last 20 seconds was so outrageously bad. Like it did something to the characters that felt so false that almost ruined the entire show.
Seriously?
I mean, I've never seen anything like that where I'm watching and go, yeah, I didn't believe that for a second. These two characters, I don't buy it.
Wow.
But the rest of it was really good. It was a cool final storyline. Really glad they did it. Good actors. When everyone's talking about True Detective season 2, all I'm thinking is, Holder and Lyndon, man, they're good characters. I really enjoyed that. But so that took some of my time. Just quick news. I just saw on my way here. I'm very excited about this because I love this actress. Shannon Sossamon was just cast in
Sinister 2.
Sinister 2. And for me, that's really exciting because she's actually one of Monty's big actors.
I love her.
It's like his muse. So she's been in all his stuff lately. And she's really good. She's a really good actress. And we both love the director of Sinister 2, Kieran Foy, who did Citadel. So this, to me, this is a really good sign that they're putting the real attention into making a good film.
Yeah.
I also went to the Creature from the Black Lagoon art show.
Oh, so did I.
Yeah, we missed each other. I was going to go with you.
A Creature features in Burbank.
Yeah, and for me, that's there's all these art shows for horror stuff, and it's fun to go to all of them, but this was the first time I couldn't miss, it's, for me, the Creature is the greatest design in horror. It's one of those characters that just somehow captures our imagination. I think it's partly because it has no explanation. All the other horror characters from Universal have some sort of human explanation to me, like Wolfman, a human becomes a wolf, a mummy. We were a human, then it became a mummy. Frankenstein's a dead man resurrected from parts. I feel like the Creature is, we don't know much about him. I think there's some sort of enigmatic quality, and yet it's got a human-like quality of desire that we can relate to. And I find the character absolutely fascinating. It was just gorgeous. There's so much fun stuff there. But Drew Struzan has this big painting there, and it's just fucking gorgeous. One of the best things I've ever seen.
Which one was his?
His is just the big painting, it looks like a movie poster. He's the guy who does all the old posters of The Thing, Star Wars, anyway, there's a imitation of it, which is probably selling for a couple hundred. And then there's the real thing. And I remember turning the guy who runs the place. I'm like, so how much for the real thing? He's just like, every single person, this place had a couple hundred people. Every person in here put all their money combined, could still not buy it.
Wow.
It was over $200,000 for the original painting. But it was so gorgeous that you're almost like, yeah, let's do it. Let's all go put our money together.
I feel like the temptation to David Scow would be outrageous.
I know. Well, he's got a very early version of it, so apparently he already kind of...
He was on our show several weeks back, but I've never met a bigger Creature fan.
Yes,
I think there's two. He's one and there's another guy. Yeah, he was there when I was there too.
He carried my daughter around for a while.
If you're ever at his house or lucky enough to see his house, he has every creature-related thing you could think of.
Yeah, he was telling me that he has like a life-size creature.
They have the pinball machine there, and I mean, if I could find a way to buy it, I would, because it's actually really reasonable given how difficult it is to find now. It's only a few grand, and it's one of those things that's like, that's the one you'd want. That and Elvira, the two. It's just gorgeous. Anyway, I just thought it was really cool. There's some really fun, and mostly playful. I'd say less like, oh wow, that's just amazing art, more playful and kind of weird. But it's for anyone who's planning a trip to LA in the next, I assume, like 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, they do it for about a month. And then
you should definitely make that a priority because it's really neat.
I'm gonna go during the week because I didn't go opening night because I went the last few opening nights and it's always so packed.
It was.
And it's really
I think I just hit the right time because right after you, it was a little clearer.
So I went right at the start, and I mean, we were like wedged in there. It was tight. So yeah. My favorite one was it was a parody one, but it was the Creature from the Black Lagoon.
3D glasses.
I liked the fish fry.
Okay.
So it was like as if he'd opened up like a fast food chain. It was
There's
really
one
cute.
where he was wearing 3D glasses and it was done like pop art, and I loved it. But also a friend of ours, Tim Polkat, and Tammy Sutton did this gorgeous. It's the size of that giant window behind you, done on glass.
Wow.
Where he's painted, and it's like bright pink word, the creature, and it's beautiful. And he's like, and the coolest thing is he's selling it for the price is the year of the movie. It's like 1952, price tag, boom, or whatever the year is.
Yeah.
And I thought that's cute, but
it's
really nice.
Because like Sam Randazzo had.
Yeah, there was a lot of
there.
people we knew with art.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my idea. I had come up with an idea. Emma had two.
Okay,
I wanted to do and the one thing that was disappointing about it was there was very little. I think it's Day of the Creature. Is that whatever the third one is, where he's walking around San Francisco.
The creature walks among us.
Yeah, with the red pants or whatever. Which is even the creature design by then. Even though I love that they were trying to make him, he's developing because he's on like land.
Well, they also set him on fire.
Right. But by making, he's like changing, he's adapting because he's on land, not the sea. I like that idea, but I hate the design. But there was very few. I thought there'd be some really cool designs, but I had a really cool idea that I thought would have made, I didn't have time because I don't have Photoshop now, but I wanted to do a piece for it, which would have been 3 different passport photos of the creature in the 3 different phases, and each one's just his information and stamped. I thought that'd be cute, but I ran out of time. But no, it's interesting, and I did think about Guillermo while I was there because I'm sure he'll go to this thing because he's one of the other big fans, and I did think like deep down I really do hope if anyone gets to do it, it's him. Because I just can't believe anyone else would do a monster justice like he would. Especially a creature like that.
And him and Scow were supposed to that one.
I know.
Years and years
Such a bummer.
Have you guys been watching The Strain, speaking of Guillermo?
I have been actually, and that's starting to get good now that they're leaving the drama behind.
Okay, because I watched the first 2 episodes and I was so bored.
No, this one actually is the turning point where they're no longer talking about family crisis and issues. They're just like, oh my God, the actual effects are fucking crazy. I mean, this giant thing shoots out of their mouth, so they're not just like vampires. They're like a weird mutated version. And I'm not still convinced about some of the drama of the show, but the actual look of the creatures. And if it goes all the way, like if it's one, I didn't read the book, but if it goes batshit where it's like everyone's getting wiped out, the internet's down, you're all fucked.
Yeah,
it could be an awesome show. It really could grow into it. But it is moving very slowly to get there.
Yeah.
But this last one was cool.
But I was just happy because I think you posted that Larry Fessenden was on this week.
I wasn't sure because this guy comes in, he's wearing a baseball cap and he's got a very round face now, and he's like he's in this one scene. I'm like, oh, that has to be Fessenden, but I looked on IMDb, no credit on IMDb,
no, it's definitely him.
Yeah, and then after it ended, everyone confirmed it, but it was pretty cool. The only bad thing is that he doesn't make it through the episode, and halfway through, I'm like, come on, let's make him a character,
you know what? I got to ask Larry about it. There was at one point where he had
him and Guillermo worked on something together.
Well, he was going to remake The Orphanage for a long time, but there was a point where Larry had a reel of just all his on-screen deaths.
Oh,
So
cool.
it's
That's fun.
5 minutes of him getting killed.
Oh, that's funny.
You know?
You could add your next to that. That's fun.
There's quite a few.
Yeah,
I mean,
fun
this
there.
is going back a
That
while.
was fun.
And the reason he couldn't release it was because I think at the time it was a Cabin Fever 2 issue. Spoiler alert, he dies in a lot of movies.
Yeah.
But
Ty West Soul
wonder if
died a
that's
little
up
in that
there.
film too.
Yeah, that's true.
No, yeah, Fessenden. That's one of the problems with casting of television, though. I would quite like somebody like him to be a lead in a show. Like, bring him into Walking
He's
Dead.
great.
You know?
He's so great. I would love to see that. Did you see anything else? I had one more that I wanted to add.
I did, but I'll save it for the thing, which is Psycho 4, and we'll talk about it in the context of the show.
That's cool. All right. Really quickly, I just wanted to mention our friends from Blue Underground put out a Blu-ray release of Hell of the Living Dead with rats. And
Rats or Rats of the Living Dead? Or
no, it's just called Rats. What's the full title of it?
are these Italian?
Rats Nights of Terror. Yeah, they're Italian. It's weird because it's like I'd seen Hell of the Living Dead. Anchor Bay had put it out several years ago, and it was in the middle of when they were getting the DVD rights to put out like all the Fulci stuff. So, you know, it was a time when I'm picking up The Beyond and, you know, City of the Living Dead and Argento stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's Hell of the Living Dead and a few other Italian movies. And it's all by Bruno Mattei.
Oh, yeah.
Who did Zombie 3 and 4 and 5, I believe.
Yeah.
He's kind of bless him. He's kind of the bad director of the bunch.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there's
to
a
say.
couple I could name, but he's definitely.
Well, you know how like, you know, Fulci and Argento movies, like there's like ridiculous things that happen in a lot of their films that you can at least justify because of the craftsmanship and the filmmaking and the
And I think
artistry
they
of it.
understand dream logic.
Yes.
Like, I think they get that it's a little dreamy, but then there's those Italian films that are just
Bruno does not have that.
funky, yeah.
Yeah, like Luigi Cosi, I think is his name. He's the guy who did like Contamination.
Yes.
You know, so there are some really high points in his film, and he does get the dream logic. But oh my gosh, as soon as people stop talking, I just want them to stop.
Yeah.
So,
Now, that all said, Hell of the Living Dead is not exactly a good movie. But if you, but you know what? There's something about it regardless. And I haven't seen it since that original Anchor Bay release. Like, it is ridiculous how great this restoration of it looks like. Sometimes I marvel like, why did you save this movie? I'm like amazed that you had like this pristine,
they
perfect
regrained
thing.
it just for
But,
you.
yeah, I mean, and it's amazing. It's got, I mean, you know, Goblin does the score, but they just reuse the score from Zombie.
Oh, wow.
Like they didn't just, I don't know if they got hired and they just like slipped them the same score or if they just shamelessly reused the same score from Zombie. And it's got like 3 or 4 different plot lines going on simultaneously, and then
It's
a lot
very
of
possible they don't even know it was you.
I know,
They were listening
exactly.
to our show going, wait a minute.
Yeah, but you know what? Despite that, it's got a weird charm to it. I think it's of all the zombie movies I've seen, I think it's the grossest. And by that I mean like the gore is like really gross.
Is
it's
it
like
gooey?
gore zone. Yes.
Okay,
it's like
because
gore
that's-
zone style stuff that most of the zombie movies don't have. It's
And most of them, they're really dry and kind of sinewy, is the effect. It's much more of like a dried out corpse with like sinew connective tissue. I've never seen very many Italian zombie films where they're actually like gooey.
It's very gross and gooey.
Okay.
And in fact, in the opening, they're in a power plant with some chemical thing going out, and the guy gets bitten by a rabid rat, which I think starts the whole thing.
Spoiler.
And then, I mean, it's in the opening scene.
I take that back, actually.
Damn
Luigi
rats.
Cosi, who I just mentioned, Contamination's very gooey. So.
Okay.
Okay, but
Incredible
yeah,
Melting Man. Like,
it looks good. And look, if again, it's not a great movie or even a good one, but
which is better of the two, you think?
of what?
Rats and...
Oh, I haven't seen Rats yet.
Oh.
That's going to be next week. I only made it as far as Hell of the Living Dead. I will say this, though. There's a great little making of documentary that's brand new to this release with apparently the silent co-director and co-writer of all these Bruno Mattei movies was Claudio Fragasso, a.k.a. the director of Troll 2.
Yeah, there you go.
So I was like blown away when I was like, what are they talking about? You know, because he does a really great interview talking about his whole relationship with Bruno and his love of, you know, cinema and how he met his wife who became his collaborator on a lot of these films, including Troll 2. But yeah, great release, really cool. And I'll check out Rats for next week.
I feel like Bruno Mattei did something like amazing that I absolutely love, and then I watched a whole bunch of the rest of his stuff, and it just wasn't top notch.
Burial Ground.
He did. I think he did Monster.
Oh, he did
Dog.
SS Girls, which isn't what I'm thinking of. That's
Right.
not like the brilliant film,
Like
but,
the third SS movie, right? Or
Yeah,
something like that.
it was definitely one of the later ones.
I thought he did the one with Alice Cooper, which I thought was called Monster Dog.
I'm looking it up right now.
Okay.
While you wait for that, look up Sybil Danning on Mr. Skin.
Hey now.
Just because.
Or in there
Just
playing with
Just
fire.
because it's worth your time.
Sybil
No matter how
Danning.
you swing. Sybil and Mr. Skin.
Wow, these are all in
This
Italian.
is a paid
Thanks,
commercial by Mr.
IMDb.
Skin Incorporated.
I wish.
Snuff Killer. No, that's not it. These
Listen,
are
if you were an expert
Cruel
at...
Jaws, that's a pretty good one.
Oh, that's right. He did the rip-off Jaws movie.
Yeah, that's
if
a
you
pretty
were
good
an
one.
expert at Bruno Mattei movies, I want you to go to our Facebook page and tell us what we should watch.
Yes.
of
And
his
why we
filmography.
should
And
care about his films.
Why we should care, exactly.
Make us care.
But all right, so that's that, and let's grab our guest.
I figured it out. He did None of Monza, which I love. So that was. I know. No one else is gonna freaking see it.
I've never even
so.
heard of that. All righty. Okay, and welcome back. This is our special episode because we're about to celebrate my birth because Bekah brought a cake.
I am lighting candles.
Not
right
just
now.
your birth. There's another major heavyweight who was born today or tomorrow.
Wow.
Today.
Hitch, yeah.
Well, I mean, on the 13th.
Yeah.
This airs the 15th. So
That's
yes,
true.
I share a birthday with Ben Affleck though.
Oh.
So take that.
You're
Yeah,
the bomb in
Ben
Phantoms.
Affleck.
Thanks, yeah.
I share one with Hugh Jackman.
I like
hey, that's a good person to
Phantoms.
He
share
can
with.
sing.
Yeah.
All right,
he's
so
got
she's
He's got lungs.
she's lighting the candles,
Oh,
but
that smells good.
I'm very excited because
like
ever
matches.
since we started the show, obviously, if you listen, you know that I did a Psycho documentary at some point in my life. I've always wanted to pick Psycho as the main central theme for one of our episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And the only person that I could think of that I would want to do this episode with is with us right now, Mr. Stephen Rebello,
And introduce the book here.
author
Oh, yeah, there you
of
go.
Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, which is essential if you're a Hitchcock fan or even a Psycho fan. It's the type of book that you need to have. This inspired me to make my documentary, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't step on your toes. There's a lot of material about the original Psycho. So I was
Unlike
like,
other
all right.
people.
Other people along the way, but yeah.
Thank you.
So
That's
Okay.
very nice. I've been wondering what the hell took you so long.
Your candles are dripping, Rob, so you're gonna have to come.
I'm gonna blow
close.
this
He
out
wanted to
quick.
wait till I saw Psycho 4 because I've been stalling on Psycho
Okay,
4.
so it's about you.
That's
It
what
is really all about.
his
All
fault.
right.
Me and
So
McGarris.
Rob is about to dive into
Okay.
a pink cake because Sprouts only had cakes that looked like they were for 6-year-old girls.
But you have to still make it good radio.
I put dinosaur candles on it. So
Ready?
ready.
Well done.
He's blown out the candles. Well done, Rob. In one blow.
Magnanimity.
What kind of cake is it?
It's vanilla.
Vanilla. All right, I
Because
could deal with
Sprouts
that.
didn't have anything
There's
creative.
a candle for every decade of his life. Congratulations, Rob. You're 50.
So
I
much.
didn't burn the studio down as
No,
I
you
thought I
didn't.
was going to. So yay! I'll dish out some cake.
Happy
Right.
birthday, Rob.
Thank you. So I guess that Elric was asking how we had initially met, which I guess I'll delve into that first. Obviously, I'd done my documentary, and I was excited about Hitchcock the movie. It was something that I was always hoping would happen at some point. And it took like 9 or 10 years officially before.
It took so long. Like, what was the delay on it? I'm sure we'll get into more of this later, but was there like one thing that caused it to go into such kind of pre-production hell?
Well, it was never the script. It was always the right director. Do you want to go here now?
Yeah.
Screw it. Let's go. Let's go.
I'm in, guys. Come on. I'm
And
interested.
almost every director that you can mention who's a household word flirted with the project, one way or another. And
Including people like Spielberg, right? I
and,
know, like, he
and,
was one
and
name.
Tim Burton. And
Was it always
and
based
Spike
around
Lee.
Psycho, the making of Psycho?
Oh yeah,
That was always the concept.
It was always that.
Yeah, that period.
And and Martin Scorsese. I mean, there were a number of people, everyone you've ever dreamed of, basically. And it was always a matter of when it would show up on their schedule, when they would get to it. And I think it was always that there were many people in the production who wanted Anthony Hopkins and only wanted Anthony Hopkins.
He was always on board since very early on.
He
Correct?
was, and he wouldn't let it go. I mean, it really mattered to him, and it was a project he really wanted to do. And and time was fleeting. And so there were a number of major flirtations. Ryan Murphy worked on it for about a year,
Right.
And I with him. And thank you.
Would that have
That
been
would've been interesting.
Yeah, would that have been a very different take, or was it?
No.
No.
Actually, it was Ryan and I worked together on the screenplay, and his and my intention was that Alma needed to be brought forward. and that it needed it. You know, I mean, there are a number of critics who sort of took me on and said, you know, why would someone who wrote a book that was essentially a literary or a book version documentary of the making of Hitchcock not want it to be that? And I thought that was a little silly, because obviously the answer to that is make a documentary. If you want to do that book, make a documentary. But since, you know, they were really interesting, talented people who wanted to make a narrative of this, I always felt that we needed to tell the story of Hitchcock in that time period, what was going on with him, what was going on at home. My concept, now it can be told, my concept for this movie was that there are 6 people who made Psycho. These are the 6 people we're going to focus on. What was going on in their lives. It was an Altman sort of movie. What's going on in their lives? Why do they choose Psycho? What are the repercussions when they start to make it? How are they colliding with each other? How are they exploding against each other? How are they troubling each other and messing with each other? But always the heartbeat for me was Alma and Hitchcock.
Right.
And what was going on with them? What troubles in their relationships, troubles in their health, their personal lives, their professional lives were brewing at this time. And I thought, that's an interesting story, as so long as there's lots of the making of Psycho. And that was, with Ryan Murphy, that was what he was focused on. We were, Alma scenes, I was writing, quite honestly, as if we were making a Bette Davis movie in the 40s or a Douglas Sirk movie in the 50s. That was our template. That's, what we were doing. We weren't making any bones about it. And that was what was attracting the cast. There was another screenwriter, and there were versions of it, and it kept becoming a little bit of this guy's work, a little bit of that guy's work, and it just became something else. There are 3 movies that you make: the one you write, the one you shoot, and the one you edit. Sometimes I recognize in the finished movie what I wrote, and other times I don't. And I think the people that were in on the movie in the beginning, the producers that were with me, I think what we miss is what was shot and not used. The making of Psycho.
Right.
I think also what was shot and not used is Hitchcock's psyche. What was going on in his life. And I wrote a lot of scenes that were always dependent upon what he was shooting that day. But they always triggered something else. When I began to read and research the affair, I should say, really an affair that Alma had with the screenwriter, I felt that was important to bring forward. And, I tell you, the numbers of critics who said that was fabricated out of whole cloth. I was astounded by the fact that I guess a few of those critics had never cracked open a couple of biographies in which that affair was documented, and we didn't even do it as an affair. We did it.
Yeah, in the film it was alluded to have, like, she had that desire, and it could have happened very easily, but because she stumbled upon him with another, it didn't quite happen.
Yeah.
It wasn't consummated in the...
No, it wasn't consummated. I love that word.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was no consomme involved.
Maybe it will be in the Van Sant remake of Hitchcock, the movie.
We should all die before such a thing happens. But that is how we met, and you interviewed me, which was lovely.
Right, yeah. The cool thing about that was, Ryan Turek from the Bloodcast and Shock to Drop, he had scheduled a set visit for the film, and he just called me up out of the blue. I hadn't done anything for Shock in a long time, and was like, you know what, if you want to do this Hitchcock one, it's totally you, because I know you'd want to be there. And it was so special. I'm sad that you weren't on set. I didn't meet you that day because there were, at that point I'd already read the script. I can't remember where I got it, but somebody sent it to me. So I already knew the film.
You read that version of the script.
A version of the script, yeah. And then, so I knew, they'd send, hey, we want you to come on this day and we're going to be shooting this scene where this happens. And I'm like, oh, I kind of know that. That sounds interesting. And they kept postponing on me like, oh, you know what? We are switching the schedule around. Can you come in on this day instead? And it turned out that I came on the last day of shooting when they converted a theater downtown into the DeMille from the original premiere of Psycho.
With our friend Emma.
Emma was there.
A friend of ours in the opening scene.
Yeah, I bumped into her there, and we hung out for a bit, and it was amazing because it was the closest I could come to going in a time machine and going to the premiere of Hitchcock, because there's all the posters, but it's the actors in the posters. Like there's Scarlett Johansson in the theatrical one sheet all over the place, and all those famous like Hitchcock billboards, but it's Anthony Hopkins, and it just felt so surreal. And I got to watch them shoot, Anthony coming out of the limo and going to the premiere. So I was like, this is so cool. I'm like at the premiere of Psycho.
Was it ever, I'm curious, was it ever discussed to shoot it in black and white?
Yes.
For me, psychologically, I think that would have made
Ryan Murphy wanted to shoot it in black and white.
Yeah, I think I would have.
Really
as a choice, I think
really went to the mat.
Yeah, I probably would have.
And he looked at a lot of interesting actors too who came in
I think
for everything.
I don't think I would have. I think that would have made it inaccessible for a general populace.
Maybe. But I think it matches the film. I think it would have told you what the film was about. And I think there's something about this is a big thing about Psycho that I think about a lot, which is that I often will show a clip of that to, say, film students nowadays. They will view that clip thinking that it's in black and white because the films of the time are in black and white because it's an old movie.
Right.
It's not. It is something that Hitchcock had to fight really hard to shoot that film in black and white because it was fully Technicolor by then. So I find
and the movies he'd done just before that were all in Technicolor.
Yeah, so I don't know the answers to this. So this is leading to a question, but I find that to be almost the biggest shame because you're like, no, this isn't just shooting another movie because all films are shot on black and white. This was a major artistic choice that really said something and the focus of the film. It creates the focus. Can you tell me why he fought for that?
Well, it's really two things. I mean, he did. Paramount basically told him, we don't want to do this. We don't like it. It's disgusting. You're not going to get the budget that you usually do.
Right.
Where you spent way too much money on Vertigo. We didn't make any money with it.
You're all proven wrong now.
You made
40 years later.
Well, it didn't make any money.
Not at the time, but critically 40 years.
And he had the effrontery to make North by Northwest on loan out to MGM, which made lots of money. So they weren't particularly happy with him. And so he was being punished. They didn't like that. They didn't like Psycho or that anything about it anyway. So he kind of made virtue of necessity. You're not going to get that budget. We're not even going to give you a soundstage because they're all full. Meanwhile, they weren't full. There was nothing shooting at Paramount at the time. So, but he also, he was also doing a little nose thumb at Hollywood where, look, if black and white movies, horror movies made for the drive-in by American International or William Castle or, wherever or whomever could make a lot of money, what if somebody really good made one of those pictures and did it in the way that people expect to see it, in black and white? And it was also a way for him to announce, this isn't North by Northwest.
Yeah.
You're going to wait in vain for Grace Kelly. This is a new me. This is a new era. And so it was a really interesting sort of, Paramount pushing him to the right decision. And then his really going, wow, this was the right thing to do.
Now, might just be rumor, but I'd always heard it was like a censorship issue. Like Paramount wouldn't do it if it was going to be in color because they thought the blood would be too stark.
No, Hitchcock thought that the color would look ridiculous. The blood would look ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But no, Paramount basically washed their hands of it. And so he said, well, look, simply, we'll shoot it with a TV crew. I'll go over to Review Universal, which is where he was shooting his TV show. The crew was in place. He didn't feel there was anything extraordinary technically that was going to be demanded of his men and women. The script was in place. They had big enough stars, and so it could be done at a price. The other part of it, and it's one of the reasons I wrote this into one of the scenes in Hitchcock, was that he really felt that this was like going to make a movie in England again, where nobody would be watching.
Right.
It was so under the radar and so in black and white and so little and grimy that people wouldn't be paying attention to him. So he was able to get away with a lot more.
Yeah.
And
I actually love that moment, that scene between him and Alma when he's saying, like, remember when it was fun for us to do this in the early days? Like, I want to get back to that.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a complete invention of mine. But it was sparked by the fact that people that I'd spoken to who were actually on the set said those things about how Hitchcock's, kind of what the barometer was, how he was feeling and what they were sensing in him. And, you could always tell when you walked on a set with Hitchcock, you just looked at his back and you knew good day, bad day. You would always tell just by his posture. But he was really relaxed on that movie. I mean, if you see some of the background shots of, that he would allow William Creamer, the set photographer, you can tell he's kind of in a good mood. He loved Janet Leigh, just loved her, but he adored Anthony Perkins because he, first of all, he was willing to do the role, the kind of role that could have crushed any actor's career.
And it did shape his career largely.
It did.
Even, in a typecast way.
It did. But, the reason I wanted to write it, the script the way I did was because there were a bunch of people who were pushed against the wall. It was Janet Leigh in a difficult relationship with her husband. They were, already having issues. She was tired of being the pretty, sexy, woman who came out and showed her ridiculously beautiful body and smiled and laughed a lot. She knew, and others knew there was something underneath. Paramount was really unhappy. They had Anthony Perkins under contract. They'd spent a lot of money on him. The movies weren't doing well. His reviews weren't very good, and they were about to give up on him. So that was to play out his last.
Wow.
John Gavin nobody wanted.
Yeah.
Rock Hudson said no, and so Hitchcock on the set kept calling John Gavin Rock. Tell Rock to.
Can we use that? I want to use this as a point. Did you see The Girl or
no?
Okay,
you haven't watched it. It's interesting because I was very reluctant to watching it because I'd heard firsthand that it was going to be a fairly negative look at Hitchcock. But after revisiting Hitchcock again recently, I did watch it because I have HBO Go now, and I have difficult thoughts. I mean, me and Elric have tried to talk about this already.
There aren't many films I've seen that have made me angry about how they've portrayed someone. And I've read Donald Spotto's book on Hitchcock, which is a beautifully written book, but there's parts that it goes pretty dark, and I don't know what's true and what's not. The problem with this movie, and especially the portrayal of Hitchcock, is that it goes basically portrays him as just basically some senile rapist. I mean, that's how it comes off to me. It's really grim. Toby Jones does a serviceable job. He's a good actor. But my problem with it, the reason why I don't believe it, even if I believed the worst things said about Hitchcock, and I'm sure a lot of it's, living within himself, the desires that he felt. The problem is this, it's very simple. And I said this to Rob the other day. It's played without humor. And so it's a fail. He has played completely humorlessly, and it's like everything I've read, everything I've heard, every story I've seen is that he leads with his dark, but the sarcastic wit.
Yes.
And if you don't allow that to be part of the film, but you're going to portray him as someone, every time the door closes, he's jumping on the girl and trying to grab her breast. It's like, I'm sorry. At that point, I can't buy what you're trying to sell. And this is coming from Tippi Hedren, right? So this is ostensibly her viewpoint of certain events.
Right. And my only disagreement with you was I actually thought Toby Jones actually was really terrific. I mean, he got the voice and the mannerisms and that stuff down. Something felt off, and it wasn't until he told me, he's like, yeah, but he has zero humor at all. And I'm like, what, that's true, because at least what image we know of Hitchcock from either his show or just, interviews is that there's always a sharp sense of humor behind all the stuff he says.
He was an imp. He was playful.
Exactly. It's so playful. The little things he would do, I don't even know what they're called because they're not trailers, but say he's got the little bird cage and he's got the little, I don't know what they were called back then. Like they're almost like teasers for his films.
Right.
They were so fun.
Yeah. The original trailers and stuff that were.
I just don't buy it. And I don't buy a singular viewpoint of a person in general. I think everyone, even the worst people, are quite complex.
Yeah.
And so I felt that was.
If you're making a movie with an axe to grind.
Yeah. That's how it felt. It felt like that. It felt like a takedown. Vanity Fair, I'm
trying to remember because it's like, again, I followed the history of Hitchcock for a long time, and it took a while for that movie to happen. And then, like, just as you guys went in production, here's this other film that's happening. The only thing that bothers me about it is even though they're unrelated, because of where they fall in the timeline, yours is during Psycho, and then that one's during The Birds, it really feels like a sad, depressing, miserable sequel to it.
It does.
Like it just goes downhill.
I mean, the way they paint him and Alma and just the whole, it's just by the end of it, I was like,
they paint him as the rapist of Marnie. I think that's what it's basically positioning him that, Marnie is his film. That's actually just it's him admitting it.
Right.
This is what he wants to do to people. And I'm just like, I just don't think it's that black. I mean, there is a lot of psychological desire and things that are being held back, and he doesn't, isn't confident about his body and all that. And that's what makes the film so interesting. I don't necessarily buy the part where he's jumping on the people every time a door closes. The part where he's actually acting on it is the part that's a little harder to swallow for me. But I don't know if, you might have more insight.
He was impotent. So what's the point?
What's he going to get?
What's the point of jumping?
Right.
And
right.
I mean, he had been impotent for many years, and he told Janet Leigh, he told Anthony Perkins. I mean, he told everybody, and and he would say to them, "They're just my little fantasies," and really, we should deny him that. I mean, look. Yeah. I wasn't there, as my mother used to say. You didn't hold the candle,
right?
So I don't know what happened, but I do think I would agree with you that a singular, humorless viewpoint is a miss.
You can't really
already.
Yeah, I one day I know it's probably hard because of the relation, but I'd be very curious if you ever do see it, just on that level, to let us know.
I promise you, I will.
It's just curious, but
enough time has gone by that I think I could dip my toe in by now.
It did have a good scene. I will give it that. On a filmmaking level, there's one scene where he's basically torturing her in a phone booth with the bird attacking, and he's doing it over and over again. He's trying to basically drive her insane, and it's pretty fun to watch.
But, that one seems all right.
But that's it's.
And I mean, it's not like you didn't shy completely away from that side of him in Hitchcock in the movie. I mean, there definitely are flourishes of that. Yeah. And you know what? I think I know this is a difficult question to answer, but I just revisited the movie since for the first time since it came out. When you're one of the screenwriters and you're collaborating with other filmmakers and there's producers involved and there's all these people. Now, at the end of the day, you're making essentially a narrative film that is based in truth, but obviously there's things that have to be moved around to make it work as a movie, as a narrative movie.
Yes.
How do you skate the line of not being exploitive with real people? You know what I mean? Because I know Joseph Stefano's wife was very upset with, I freak out because Karate Kid's my favorite movie, and I see Ralph Macchio, and I'm like, oh my God, yeah, he's totally Joseph Stefano. But I know she was unhappy with the line about Alma co-writing the movie or whatever. There's little things here and there.
Well, she should be.
Yeah.
Oh,
okay.
Really?
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, then there you go.
So there were flourishes that.
Well, but also, Mrs. Stefano was taking the movie on because it was completely inaccurate. Because after all, the logo Psycho, which is so iconic now. Well, they show it on a book, and the book, but that was only used for the movie. Well, no, the Robert Bloch novel had that iconic logo, and Hitchcock bought it. So some of her issues were just quarrelsome and incorrect. But having said that, Alma worked on every movie.
Yeah.
Lots of people work on every movie, but Alma worked on every movie. But Joseph Stefano wrote that script. If you read his first draft, there are changes, but essentially that was almost a white screenplay as opposed to a rainbow screenplay. So changes were made, things were shot and dropped, but that's Joseph Stefano's interpretation of Robert Bloch's work. There are those who want to negate Robert Bloch, that he had anything to do with it.
I know.
He created those characters. He created Norman Bates. He gave those people those names. He created the story. He created the shower. I think that Joseph Stefano did an extraordinary job with that screenplay. I mean, she started taking me on the internet because I didn't mention her husband in the book. Well, you need to read the book to realize that Joseph Stefano has a chapter or two, and he's peppered throughout the book. So
she's inaccurate is the problem.
Yeah, so it's just inaccurate. I don't mind. I don't mind controversy, and I don't mind defending something that than I did. But I'm not answering your question, which was, I think, a lot more interesting, which was, skirting the line with controversy.
Yeah.
And, for me, look, I met Hitchcock. I spent some time with him. I spent a lot of, when I was writing that book on Psycho, I spent a lot of time with people who really knew him and knew him for years. And I listened. I was, a sponge. I took all of that stuff in. I used to be a psychologist. I mean, I'm not stupid about people and their behavior. So I listened to a lot of stories about Hitchcock and how he thought and how he operated on the set and how he was with women and how, he'd pick one person on the crew to terrorize. And usually it wasn't the woman, it was the good-looking man because he was envious.
Yeah.
Right.
He told me, do you know what a shock it is for me to look in a mirror or store window and not see Cary Grant? Okay, he was joking, but he wasn't, joking on the square, as they used to say in the 40s. He hung out with really beautiful people.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember the line at the start of the Spotto book. I think it's saying, it has a quote, I think he floated in a sea of alone. Or something. It cut me to the core. I opened the first page of that book. It was like 10 years ago. I remember the first line was like a quote from something else about Hitchcock, and I was just like,
he was a terribly isolated, shy man, and his humor, the humor that he would have on the set, or that was written for him by people, by at least one great writer who really was the voice of Hitchcock in the trailers and those introductions and outros for the TV show. He was an actor. That was an act. It was, they were basing it off, aspects of Hitchcock. He was very witty and he was very funny and sardonic. Played major jokes on me, just a journalist coming in to see him. So I could only imagine what he would be like over time. But he was delightful. He told me how he would dress me and how he would light me, and I didn't think that was, oh, how dare he? Isn't that pervy? Right. I just thought, how delightful that this man is seeing our conversation as I would film it this way.
Yeah.
Here's
cinematically. This is how we would talk.
I mean, and how, and he told me stories about movies that he was still planning, even though it was clear he was never going to make another film.
Did he talk about that X-rated one? The one that stills have recently emerged. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It was kind of Technicolor, but nudity and.
Yeah, but that would have been no more frank than Antonioni or
no. At the time, it would have actually made
Easy
sense.
Rider,
And after Frenzy, I mean, he was already pushing the envelope.
That was before Frenzy.
Actually. Interesting.
But yeah, I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is that in terms of moving things around historically and wiggling dates and things like this when you're doing essentially an entertainment. My bellwether was always be true to the character, be true to the spirit of the person. I spent a lot of time with Janet Leigh. I traveled with her. Yeah. I knew how she talked. I knew how she walked and moved. I spent time with even Joseph Stefano, who was lovely to me to a point. I spent time with Saul Bass. I spent time with all of those people, long time. So I thought, well, what was the essence of them? And I have a little thing when I used to be a therapist, I wasn't aware of it. I would always have a pen in my hand, and it was unconscious. I would start to draw, and then when I would look at the thing that I drew, it was usually what I felt was wrong with the person or the essence of the person, and that's the kind of thing that I did with. I
doodle constantly. It's it's a constant thing. So, every notebook I have is covered.
And it's not boredom. It's that, your mind is working in a bunch of ways, and you get different feelings and, synapses firing and other things happen. So it's a little bit of automatic writing. But what I did with all of those characters, and I had to think of them as characters, in adapting my own book, was to try to feel like what was ailing them, what was troubling them, what was giving them joy and giving them solace. And so those are the things I tried to to bring about. But it was not based on, I think I need a character where or the movie will need a character where this or this happens. It was always, well, I spent some time with that person. I can tell you the way they fidgeted. I can tell you when they flinched when I would ask certain questions. I could tell there were sore spots. There were little pressure points. So so those things, and they didn't all obviously come across in the movie because you need the right casting and you need the right sort of feel. Right. You need to spend some time with the actors, but that's why writers become directors.
Is in that regard, were there any actors that were cast in those roles, considering you spent a lot of time with the actual people that I don't know, took you back like, oh my God, that person's totally...
Scarlett scared me.
And that it's funny because when I heard that casting...
It's wrong.
I didn't see it at all. I was like, her as Janet Leigh? I don't know about that. But surprisingly, the way she holds herself and her voice and everything, I thought...
She got it. She channeled something about Janet that is what, really good actors do.
Right.
That shouldn't have worked, but she loves old films.
Yeah.
She knows old films like the back of her hand. And she got something of that high style that, look, I know how to walk into a room and make everyone look at me. And Janet knew how to do that.
Yeah.
Janet taught me how to walk into a room. She said, I was taught this by MGM. Here's what you do. And I got to watch Janet do that. Nobody told Scarlett how to do that. She figured it out.
Wow.
So there, you get those great surprises where, whoa, that's a little scary.
Yeah.
There were a couple of moments when Anthony Hopkins reminded me of the Hitchcock that I met.
Had he met him?
Once. I think they met at. They were in the same restaurant. Something. Helen Mirren met him because she auditioned for Frenzy.
Oh wow.
And,
back when she was a knockout. Too many people have only seen her at the age she's at, but Helen Mirren, my God.
Wow.
Ridiculous.
I want to take it back a little bit. A twofold question, which is for both you and Hitchcock, if you can answer for me, is why Psycho for you too? Like why, was it a general interest in Hitchcock or what, to go through with a book like this. It takes a lot of dedication.
Picking this one, but also this leads, I wanted all of us to talk about the first time we saw Psycho, like around the table.
But I'm also curious, like why for Hitchcock to take on a project that was going to be difficult, that he would have to almost take more ownership of and kind of break a little bit from the studio. What was it that was driving him with that particular material?
That's a great question too. I think, I think he saw something really manageable. I know we could get really introspective and psychological about this, but let's be honest. He saw a way to make a buck.
Yeah.
He thought this is a good yarn. We can do it simply, cheaply. I can have fun with it. I can have some freedom with it. And Paramount's going to make it.
Right.
Because he just thought, why would they not? It's a Hitchcock picture because I'm making it. They didn't see it that way. So I don't think he thought North by Northwest was trouble. You want to hear about trouble? That was trouble.
Not that anyone would know because everyone just sees the classic on screen.
But it cost a lot of money, and Cary Grant gave him a really tough time. And logistically, it was it's a big, for Hitchcock, it was a big.
It's a big chase scene.
Movie.
It's like a 2.5-hour chase scene.
Exactly. And he and my mentor was Ernest Lehman, and Ernie was a screenwriter on North by Northwest, and they went at it.
Interesting.
Hammer and tongs. But
I've never heard that about.
I think, you see.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So in other words, if I wrote a picture about North by Northwest, and I had, Ernie and Hitchcock, pardon me, arguing, someone would say, well, that didn't happen. Well, yeah, it did. The thing is, we all have relationships to, whether it's Fellini or Truffaut or Christopher Nolan or David Fincher. We all think we know who they are. We all think we know, that we've hung out with them because we know their movies. We have not. Well, some of us have, but mostly, no, you don't know. Right. And what you think you may know about Hitchcock is probably not accurate. Yeah. So, in terms of Psycho, though, I think it was a straight up. I've never done anything like this. He'd never really done a horror movie.
Did he enjoy those kind of like the William Castle movies and things? He didn't even enjoy them.
He thought they were rubbish.
So it's his way of kind of exploiting and
He thought they were
elevating.
childish.
I heard a funny, by the way, just really quick, and we'll get into this later.
Well, that's why he said, well, what if someone good actually
Right. It's like elevating
It's like a
himself.
twofold thing, but yeah. I heard a really funny story because John Landis apparently used to always have lunch with him on the Universal lot towards the end of his life, and I want to say,
so lucky.
Yeah, I can't remember which movie it was. It was a De Palma movie. I can't remember. Forgive me if I'm wrong. Was he alive when Dressed to Kill came out?
Yeah.
He was, okay. So I'm pretty sure it was Dressed to Kill where Landis asked him what he thought, and he was just like, pure rubbish. Something like that. From what I understand, he was not a fan of De Palma aping his style, but I don't know.
You know, there was a scene that was supposed to be in Hitchcock where Hitch and Alma were driving by a drive-in. Well, Alma was driving because Hitch was a terrible driver. Everyone thinks he couldn't drive, but no one wanted to drive with him because he was terrible. He kept like on the brake anyway. And they were driving by a theater in Southern California where William Castle's movie Macabre was at the drive-in. That was the thing. Ding! That's when the light went on because the line was out. To there in a drive-in. People were waiting and waiting to get in. So I think it was that he wanted to do something different. He was, fed up with the Cary Grants and the Grace Kellys and the Kim Novaks of the world, not because they weren't wonderful, but because they were expensive and they took the attention off him.
Yeah,
when you stop and think of it. And so he thought this would be manageable. It didn't turn out to be manageable because of Paramount's lack of interest and stonewalling, and then it became difficult because of the censorship issues, and you can't do this, we can't show that. We take it so lightly, but how do you show a woman being stabbed to death in a shower when you're shooting in 1959,
right?
And you have a movie star, and nudity isn't allowed? It seems like it would be so simple, but no, it had to be invented. And what does the sound of a knife in a body sound like when you're allowed to actually do that?
And what happens when you position the audience as the one stabbing
Exactly.
this victim? I mean, he forces us to be the ones. We're not seeing it from her viewpoint, really. You see it momentarily, but you feel it kind of from. Because you start with the viewing scene. It's very interesting.
That's right.
How many cuts are in that? Is it like 63 or far more?
72, I always thought.
It's a lot.
72?
72?
72.
I mean, he does get to experiment more than he has.
You get another piece of cake.
I think I have diabetes from the first one, so I'm kind of done.
The thing is, it's montage. I mean, it's little bits of film to create an emotional impression,
right?
A visceral impact in the audience.
Now, were montages very common at the time? Because I know Vorka Pig had kind of cornered them in the 20s and 30s, but they seem like they faded out.
Not of that sort.
Okay.
Well, because usually montage is used to shorten time.
Yeah.
But this isn't being used to shorten time. It's being used to unsettle.
Right.
Also, because all the shots are from different, it
that's
moves
right.
and
That's
there's
right.
Chiaroscuro. What is the artist? Chiaroscuro is a word that I think has been used for that in the past.
Sure.
I'm not an art history major.
So what was your, and I don't want to hear from everybody, but what was the first time seeing Psycho yourself? You were already a Hitchcock fan at that point when this movie came out, or
look, I was a kid from the island of misfit toys. That's who I was. I was broken and funny and odd and smart and too pushy, and I was everything a kid shouldn't be in a small mill town. Where people are supposed to keep their noses down, and in Massachusetts, but my parents were different, and they knew I was, and they would take me to the drive-in theater, and I would see Hitchcock pictures with them. My dad was tall and very thin and stammered, so I thought he was James Stewart. My mom was blonde and ridiculously pretty and very sunny, and I thought she was Doris Day. So I remember very clearly going, I think it was a reissue of it doesn't matter really, but I was in the back seat, and we were at the drive-in, the Somerset drive-in in Somerset, Massachusetts, and we were watching The Man Who Knew Too Much, and I thought I was that kid. I was terrified at the thought that a little boy can be taken from his family. And that scarred me. But because I was a participant in that movie. At that time, I was going too young with older friends to see horror movies, and the more horrifying, the better. I had no patience. I had no patience for Westerns. I would go with my mother to love stories because I thought what was really funny is if my mother saw Susan Hayward on screen or Lana Turner in an outfit, my mother would be wearing that outfit the next week because she sewed it, and she would wear it to church. So I thought that was funny, but I only wanted to see horror movies. So,
welcome to
American
the club.
International. And
You're in a good room.
But, my parents didn't get down on me for that. They
Mine
thought
didn't
I'd be okay, because I would also go to see other movies with them. And so I saw Psycho too young, but I was allowed to go with friends. And I saw it at the Durfee Theater, beautiful movie palace, elegant with sunken fish tanks and all of that.
Did anyone know anything about it at that point, or was it completely blind?
We just knew that there was this weird ass trailer with Hitchcock who was saying something happens in a shower, and I saw that trailer and I was just, what is this?
Yeah.
Now they're making a movie
That's so cool.
for me.
Yeah.
And I knew, and I didn't, and I have to admit this, I didn't understand half of it, but I knew it was really grown up and scary. And Janet Leigh is naked in my view.
Right,
and
right.
It was mind blowing for a kid. Also mind blowing because my teachers were in the place was packed, not a seat to be had, and I saw my school teachers running. I saw one of my school teachers running up the aisle in terror. Great level playing field kind of thing.
Right.
I was scared of this teacher, and suddenly I saw her as a wuss.
Yeah.
And it was so empowering.
I'm kind of envious of can you imagine somebody running up and down the theater because they're scared?
I could never even imagine. Like, I've seen
that.
people walk out because they're disgusted or
there was that
they're
too.
appalled by it, but I've never seen somebody leave in terror.
No, there was that too, and also hearing men scream. I'd never heard a man. My family was Portuguese immigrants and French Portuguese immigrants. Men don't scream. You suck it up. I heard men a little hoarse like I am now, but yelling.
Yeah.
So it was, what an experience. It was, I
would bet money that it's when the detective gets done.
Yes.
Because there's something, I think, there's a macho quality to this character, and you trust that he will get to the bottom of it.
Because detectives always do.
Right. And then suddenly a door opens and you're overhead, and God, what is this? The way the angle the knife even comes down on is shocking. Yeah, it's really interesting.
When I was teaching film production at Hunter College, I used to make my students emulate that shot. And that was one of their lessons, was how did they do it? And so they actually had to take a chair and film it like a rolly chair as they were moving across the room with the camera in front of them and somebody screaming from the rolly chair. So it worked the same, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah, so it's a pretty enviable. And then, of course, I went back to see it again and again because the theater wouldn't let it go. I mean, it was like The Sound of Music. It was my Sound of Music.
Right.
Like the theater just they were making money hand over fist.
Were there any of those cutouts? I remember.
Yes.
Where Hitchcock was saying, "Don't ruin the ending."
Yeah.
Wow.
They were.
Don't ruin the twist.
They were in the front, and then when you came out, there was another one saying, "Now that you've seen Psycho, be amazed, be whatever, and be silent."
Wow, that would never work today.
I would love to see that on eBay.
Before,
Imagine one of those on eBay
during the
before they ever leave the theater.
Yeah, it's completely different world, and Hitchcock's sort of compact with the audience back in those days because the TV show was so intense. I mean, you do what he told you because he had a British accent, so there was that, and he was a real authoritative figure, and he asked you in a cute way, So it was so playful, but I was such a freak. I used to make my dad, bless him, my dad, who worked in a factory, and he worked in shifts, and my mom and I would go and get him, and I'd actually make him drive past the Durfee Theater to see people in line because they wouldn't go. They were too scared to see it.
Like a roller coaster ride that you just got those people who back out.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So anyway, that was the first time I saw it.
Wow. And actually really quickly before we get to everyone else, first time you met Hitchcock, because I know you told me the story and it's fantastic.
Ooh, well, the first time I used to call him up on the phone when I was a little kid because we didn't have Twitter. So celebrities weren't accessible, but I just thought, I just didn't know that you didn't find out somebody's phone number and then call it. It never entered my mind.
How old were you about this time? You're fairly young, right? When you
about 8.
8 when you contacted Hitchcock.
Yeah. So the ridiculous thing is that, and here's what I think happened. I think I just got through at a time where he had a new phone system, and somebody didn't pick up, but he did. Huh. So I talked to him, and then it was fun, and so we did it again. And
do you remember how you got his number? Did you just
Yeah, I just called information. And I asked for Universal Pictures or something. I think I said Universal. I want to get me Universal Pictures.
I've heard so many stories that was common. Like you could just call information and be like, I want to talk to Rita Hayworth, and they would look up the number for you.
Of course. Yes. Well, had I been I was a Massachusetts kid. Had I been a California kid, I would have gotten on that lot.
Yeah.
I would have been, I would have been thrown off like Spielberg. And anyway, so that was the first time we met, at least by phone. But then there was a picture he made called Torn Curtain, and he decided he was going to do a different kind of a premiere. So we had a daytime premiere, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning. I can't remember. Someone will, I'm sure, look it up and tell me I was wrong. But in Boston at the Music Hall Theater, and I didn't drive then. I was too young. But an older friend of mine drove and said, we took off school and said, screw it. Hitchcock is in Boston. We're 40 minutes away. Let's go. And so we did. And, and this is how it was in those days too. Beautiful, ornate, Versailles-type movie palace lobby. And, however many people could fill the seats. I mean, there must have been, I think that was a 4,000-seat theater. Mm-hmm. So 2,000 people in the lobby. Hitchcock walks out, no police, no guards, maybe one or two, but they were laughing and scratching. They weren't paying any attention. With these beautiful French women dressed as French maids, leading out this 50-layer cake. And there he was. And so there was a big crowd. And I said to my friend Richard, I'm going to go get his autograph. And we were way in the back. And he said, how could you possibly do that? Said, watch me. And I just went through the crowd. It was like Charlton Heston parting the Red Sea. I don't know why those people thought that little bratty kid in a Madras jacket with a crazy suntan was important, but they either took pity on me, they let me right through, and I, thrust my book at Mr. Hitchcock with a pen, smart enough to bring a pen, and said who I was, and he remembered, and he was delightful and charming about it, and there are newsreels of it actually.
So, wow!
But anyway, so
that's cute.
So there was that, and then and then flash forward, there I am. Post grad, I'm working in a Harvard teaching hospital in Boston, and decided I'm not sure this career is for me. I'm getting really good at being a therapist, and I loved it. Loved the people that I was working with. But I decided. Well, I was going to grad school. I started at Harvard, and I decided during my semester break I was going to come out to Los Angeles, and I had it in my mind that I would be talking to Alfred Hitchcock before that vacation was through. And I'm telling you, it's sort of, you manifest this power. I was at a party and they said, well, you don't look happy to be on vacation. You look like somebody who likes to do stuff all the time. I said, yeah, I'm restless. Well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to interview Alfred Hitchcock. And somebody said, well, his number is, take this down. And they actually read the number off because it was an assistant to Cary Grant who had to remember all of Mr. Hitchcock's, Mr. Grant's intimates and phone numbers. And So there it was. And then 2 days later, I was sitting in his office, promised a few minutes and spending a lot of time with him. It was pretty spectacular.
Wow.
So there we were. I mean, it was in a weird, it just felt sort of fated to be. But he was lovely to me. I mean, he was so encouraging. I mean, and he gave me lovely ideas, which he had given me permission to film because he wasn't going to get to. So watch out.
Did you ever read the Truffaut Hitchcock interviews?
You know, once I knew that was coming out, I had to order it at the local bookstore. And yes, I read it and read it and read it again and then read it some more.
Yeah, for anyone wanting to be a filmmaker, it's one of the best filmmaker. I mean, it's just filmmakers on filmmaking, but it's like perfect the way they articulate the back and forth. Because they're both so different, and yet it works perfectly.
Have you listened to the transcripts?
No, I never have. I know they're released. Yeah,
better than the book.
Oh, okay, interesting. No, I should.
The things that. No, we won't be putting that in that book about her or him.
Oh, interesting.
What a pity. It's great stuff.
I have a quick, because you were talking about Alma, this was a while back, but I wanted to ask you at the time. I probably feel about Vertigo maybe the way you feel about Psycho. You might feel this way about Vertigo.
Yeah, I do feel that way about Vertigo.
I think Vertigo is the movie that, I think it's my favorite film ever made. And I think it's every year, if I watch it, say once a year, I just discover whole new things about it. And I think that's because it's such a big movie.
Yes.
Is Alma Midge? I watched it recently and I thought to myself, oh, so she's like, if this was his desire, it's like the Midge character who I always found kind of obnoxious growing up. And I always felt you could cut her scenes out, and I was like, oh, it'd be a better movie just without those scenes. But now I realize, no, that's the choice. This is the whole problem with his character. He needed those two.
I think.
But I wondered if there's some of Alma working her way into that character.
Well, there are the glasses.
Yeah.
And there's the sensible.
She's very
salt of the earth, helpful.
Yeah,
right,
artistic,
shoulder to shoulder,
artistic. She's drawing,
Yeah, well, look, Midge was Hitch's idea.
Yeah,
I shouldn't say.
Okay,
shouldn't say Hitch. That's presumptuous.
Right.
It was Mr. Hitchcock's idea, and the wonderful screenwriters, especially Samuel Taylor, realized that. Made it that she was such a helpmate. I've always had, somebody told me recently that at one point when he knew that Vera Miles wasn't going to be able to do the movie, although she was able to do the movie because she was fully ready, they had delayed the movie so many times, having nothing to do with her, that he considered at one point casting her as Midge.
Oh, wow.
And that would have been fantastic. Not that Barbara Bagatis is brilliant, but I think it would have been really cruel, but it also would have been spectacular.
Right.
And she would have been better suited, I think, for that role than she would have for Madeline, although we'll never know.
Right.
But I think you're onto something.
Yeah. Okay. It was just it was only the last time I watched it when you were just talking about Alma.
By the way, Alma was at that Torn Curtain screening. She stood in a corner. Oh man. Okay. Anyway. It's a strong memory for me and a difficult memory for me. But I saw her standing in the corner, and everyone was paying attention to Hitchcock because you did,
right?
And no one was paying attention to her, and she was standing in the corner with this fixed, dutiful smile, being the good wife, and that planted a seed.
Yeah,
and that became a speech in Hitchcock.
Yeah,
that's where it started. Seeing her standing in the corner. And even as a kid, I thought, what is that like? What would that be like?
Right.
Yeah.
I lived in the shadow of a mother who everyone paid attention to. And I was a singer, and there was even a competition. So I sort of had a feel for what it's like to be, kind of to be in the shadow and then to break from the shadow of someone who is, intensely charismatic. And so, it struck a really deep chord in me. And I always remember 2008 Christmas, Ryan Murphy calling me saying, you know what, we need a scene in which Alma tells him off, tells him what it's like to be married to him. And I said, no problem.
Yeah.
I've got that.
That's really interesting.
40 minutes later, I emailed in the scene. That's pretty much every word is what you see. You know, when something comes from a really deep place in you, you can't deny it. And it's pain. That was really painful to put on the page, but it came from it was an explosion. It was a cry from the heart. So I felt very close to Alma. And I hope we did her justice. I mean, I hope we did her some justice because she was a remarkable person.
Did you spend a lot of time with her as well?
No.
Okay. Because I always thought it was interesting, especially in the movie, Helen said, like, if you really search, there's not much material of her, you know, doing interviews, right? Like, you know, I know Helen had a tough time trying to figure out exactly who she was because it's like, you don't hear her talking in anything. And it's like, well,
she was one of those really talented people who could have been a director on her own, but yet she didn't really have that temperament. She was very shy, painfully shy around people, and yet charming and chipper and bird-like. Everyone to a person that I spoke with always said bird-like about Alma.
Strange,
which is also
especially considering Psycho.
Bird-like. But she was very sharp and very precise in her diction and very crisp in every way. But I think there were just deep reserves of feeling in her, and I always felt that Whit was like a Cary Grant. He was a substitute for what she was not getting from Hitchcock, who could be very withholding in terms of his emotions and in terms of his feelings. He held a lot in check, and we as audience members are the beneficiaries of all that pent up, feeling. But it couldn't have been easy to be around.
Yeah. Which is the perfect segue to transvestism.
But really, what isn't?
This is a thought on the way here. Okay, so I was thinking about this film because I watched Psycho 4 last night, and every time people write about this movie, they mention transvestism and stuff. And I was thinking about that and go, he's not a transvestite. He's not a transvestite at all. A transvestite would be someone who would choose to dress like a woman because they want to do. He has a part of his personality that his mother is ingrained inside he has another fractured self that dresses like her mother.
Isn't that the final speech of the movie?
What? That the transvestite?
Yeah.
But every single article, well, that's more about,
he becomes mother.
Yeah, partly.
I mean,
but what's weird is about the interpretation over the years is everyone always writes, oh yeah, he likes to dress up as a woman. It's just like he likes to. He's not even Norman anymore, right? No. So I was thinking that seems to be a major, I think it's a really major false reading, and it's led to all the ripoffs.
There's actually
which we have a lot of films that are ripoffs of.
Is that what we want to segue into? Because there's a really great question about that I wanted to bring up at some point.
But, just in general, I'm just curious if that came up in any of the research you're doing, or
it came up in Anthony Perkins, who felt very clearly that Norman wasn't dressing up as mother.
Yeah.
Norman is.
His mother
is dressing up as mother.
Yeah. It's just how she dresses. She's not dressing for any fetishistic purpose. And I think that's one of the bad raps. I think it has this. There's a fetish quality that people are maybe putting on it.
I agree with you, and that's a really interesting comment. And it's also comes from a false reading of the scene with the psychiatrist, because you notice that everyone in that room except for a Vera Miles who's feeling every minute.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all glib people. Let's wrap this up. Let's not talk. Ooh, that's the underneath stuff. Let's not deal with that. And one of them says, throws out transvestite.
Right.
He barely knows what the word means.
Right.
And it's clear. Even the psychiatrist corrects him. But people, it's funny. People bag on that scene a lot. And first of all, not everyone in 1960 was hip to what was going down in Norman Bates's mind. I'm sorry. It seems so simple now, but you've seen the movie a zillion times, or you've heard about it.
So you had to have the disclaimer ending to explain what was going on?
Well, you had to at least wrap it up for the plausibles in the audience, as Hitchcock used to call them. But also, it's a typical Hitchcockian misdirection scene. It's everything's normal. It's like in an Agatha Christie novel. Or Sherlock Holmes. It's the detective wrapping it all up and making it normal for us. It's just, it was just a nightmare. We're all fine now.
Right.
But then he pulls the rug out from under you and goes, no, those people didn't know what they were talking about. This is what it's really like to be insane. Right. This is what it's really like to lose your identity. Watch Norman, or watch what's left of Norman as he fights his last and Mother really takes dominance. And then watch, for those people who actually think the movie, it's like saying The Birds is about birds. I mean, it's just an insane thing to think. But anyway, all of the film sets about overbearing mothers, or men who can't break from them. Or in terms of Psycho, this is about the $40,000. So of course he has the black joke of the car being dragged from the sewer for people who are really wondering what's going to, it was all about the money. Right. I mean, Hitchcock is laughing up his sleeve, but at the same time he's doing something really profound and sort of mind shattering. I always talk about, or people always talk about the duality of Norman Bates. There's even a line in Hitchcock, which I hate, about duality. It's not duality, it's multiplicity. It's multiple personalities. Perkins even plays, between lines, you see different kinds of personalities emerging in him, and he pushes them down and somebody else comes up.
He's like a character in flux trying to find his actual identity.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he's a conduit, and there's a war inside him, and there are a bunch of personalities, jostling for dominance. In the end, Mother wins. There's sweet, charming Norman who may as well be batting his eyelashes. There's, aggressive Norman who, is master of his own destiny. There's Mother who goes up the stairs swishing her hips. I mean, there are so many.
And almost all of those sides come across in the scene where he wants to make sandwiches with her, have a sandwich with Marion, because in that scene, you see every side of it, but more than anything, you just see a person trying to connect to another person. Yes. You see him desperately reaching out, we could be friends. Yeah. And it's kind of weird. Well, it's because of who he is.
It is. It's weird and heartbreaking.
Yeah, exactly.
More, even the chemistry in that scene between the two of them. You think
it's one of the best.
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe these two.
Maybe he's a good-looking guy. Yeah. He's a great-looking guy, and but he's awkward, and that's kind of what undoes him, right? Some of the way he phrases things.
Well, she also, she as a character is also maternal,
right?
And so, I think the way Janet plays it is pretty remarkable. There is a moment when you think, oh, perhaps there will, and we're all, especially people who grew up with movies of the 40s and 50s and 60s, we're all preconditioned to think there's going to be a romance. Somebody's going to, somebody's going to like somebody, even in this dark world that Hitchcock is presenting. But
it could. I mean, Hitchcock might be saying that it's in fact the money that has stopped these two people from connecting in that moment, because gets to the end of the night, she could go off with him, but she stole a bunch of money, so she knows that's and that gets in the way. It's a perfect MacGuffin. Yes. It fits in there with this stuff. Yeah,
it's probably my favorite scene in the whole movie.
Yeah, but what you were saying before about Hitchcock, I think Rear Window, the opening of Rear Window, it basically sums up the ending of Psycho, which is to make maybe a better movie, you would show just what the camera shows. It shows all the details, his broken leg, know every detail you would ever need to know about this guy. He's showing you with the camera because he's one of the best visual filmmakers. Right. And then the phone rings, he answers the phone, and for 2 minutes, he recapitulates everything you just saw on the phone. And people asked Hitchcock at some point about that. They said, why that? He goes, because I don't want a single audience member left behind. 95% of the audience might have gotten the first part, but I want the other 5 too. And I think that sums up with Psycho too. It means he really was making film for everybody. Mm-hmm. And your average film artist is just like, oh no, I don't care who gets this or not. He cared. And I think that's a very interesting
It is
point,
a very interesting. It's a really interesting point. And always Ernie Lehman, in terms of talking about writing with Hitchcock and advising me, was always, it's always about telling the audience and then telling the audience and then telling the audience. Right. And Hitchcock would never trust the audience to get it. So make sure you hammer it home. In the most economical and artistic way you can possible. And sometimes you just got to go, okay, the date is so-and-so. We're going to show you a calendar. Or, we're going to show you a travel poster. So you're in San Francisco or wherever. But
Vertigo does leave a lot of loose ends, and maybe that's why I come back to it, because there are a lot of things about that you just can't explain. There's just moments that don't make logical sense, and I think that might be why that film really holds up as this kind of mysterious bag that you keep returning to.
It's the deeper you get, the more lost you get, and there are no answers. It's just a riddle within an enigma within a
right. It's so good, and Jimmy Stewart's just so playing against type.
He's so brilliant. And he's so naked and vulnerable.
If you haven't seen it for a long time, or if you've only seen it once because a class made you to, I swear it is. There aren't many films that truly get better every time you watch them. That's one of them. That's one of the films that it just opens up a little more. I feel like all of Twin Peaks is all due to a film like Vertigo. It is somebody delving into these very personal, weird mysteries that open up all these other characters. Yes. It's interesting. We have to go on to talk about Van Sant, but I don't necessarily want to talk about it just to bag it, because that's an easy target. We were talking just before about kind of the things that are held back in Psycho, partly maybe because of the time, maybe because of how Hitchcock, that aren't held back. You've seen the Van Sant version.
No,
you've never seen it.
I've seen.
Okay,
I've
but
seen,
I've
seen bits of it.
Now, what was the conscious choice to avoid it?
It just didn't interest me. I mean, it didn't interest me in a Rhode Island School of Design art project.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
View.
Yeah.
I thought the casting was off and odd.
Very strange casting
to begin with, and I didn't feel any heat from it. I didn't feel any. Well, who's sexy in it? Who's going to make my heart hurt? Who's going to take me into the story? I mean,
you've never seen Vince Vaughn dressed as a woman, baby.
It's just bizarre. It doesn't come across well.
I have, because I've seen stills.
Okay,
but I haven't seen. I haven't seen it in motion. But I'm going to leave my psyche unscarred, at least for a little more time.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, he was very nice. He, being Gus Van Sant, he was very kind to me. I mean, he called me and he used the book. It was on the set all the time.
So he talked to you before he made the movie about
before and during.
Okay.
During, he invited me to the set and he showed me about 20 minutes of it. So
you've seen some.
I've seen some.
Did he articulate why he was so interested in doing this?
Yeah. Like, what's his motivation behind it?
He had a very interesting sort of Warholian view of it, that he was repurposing a work of art, that it wasn't taken away from the original work of art, that he was doing it in color for generations who, preferred color films and had grown up with more color films than not. I never understood a word of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I understood it intellectually, but I never understood it emotionally.
Right, which is how films work, emotionally, not intellectually.
Yeah.
The good ones.
Yeah. At least they do for me.
Yeah, but I think it is pretty universal. That's why it's such a universal.
But but when I saw the footage, I always friends of mine have this thing. Well, they're in musical theater, and like, why did this property need to sing? I mean, who said this had to sing? And with this, I said, well, who said this movie had to scream again? And who's going to scream watching it? And who is this movie made for? I really couldn't wrap my mind around the why of it.
Well, and we were talking about backstage. He's a really good film. I think Van Sant's a great filmmaker.
He's one of my favorites.
Yeah, especially when he taps into the personal, which is what Hitchcock did for Psycho. And I feel like if he had made just a remake, like this is going to be Gus Van Sant's version of what Psycho could be.
Oh, I would have been down for that.
It would be so interesting to see what he would have done with it. But because of this, he's kind of making him a slave to the shot for shot, even timing scenes. He was, every detail
That's unbelievable.
Every detail looked flawless in the production design. But then he does these weird flourishes, which are exactly from all his films, like sped up footage of clouds, cows, S&M, blindfolds and stuff at the weirdest moments that you're like, well, why did you choose now to make your statement on top of something that's where I was likening it to signing a forgery? Well, why'd you do that? It's interesting. I don't
look, when you're making a movie or dreaming of making a movie, writing a movie, you have your reasons.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes you're not even aware of them. You can't articulate them, but there's a drive.
Right.
I mean, I don't for a minute think that he was doing it as a wank. I think it mattered to him. I mean, I love his movies.
Yeah.
When he's on, he's really extraordinary.
Oh, and he's also rare because he can step into a schmaltzy Hollywood Good Will Hunting type stuff and make something perfect that affects everyone and works. And then he can turn around and go make Elephant and something where you're like, oh my God, you know.
But some of his quirkier ones, like My Own Private Idaho and To Die For.
To Die For is incredible. You're like really shocked how
I love
that really gets under your skin. You know, it's just
interesting. You see, to me, To Die For is more Hitchcockian than Psycho.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. I even think Elephant and things like that have the at least the rising tension of what Hitchcock knew how to,
and yes, exactly, rising tension and a sense of the weirdness and underbelly of American life, or just how weird people and interesting people can be, and what they do in private. I mean, Hitchcock was fascinated by what do people do when they think no one's looking.
Yeah.
Well, they go to motels, they shack up, they think and dream things that they shouldn't. They trespass,
right?
And
they steal money.
They steal money out of desperation, and impulse. But when I began with Gus Van Sant's movie, when I began to hear the actors in their interviews talk about, well, you know, I think Anne Hesh said something about she couldn't understand why Marion was such a flighty, ditzy woman. I thought, well, there goes that boat. That ship has sailed.
Right.
Or William Macy calling Hitchcock a punk because he didn't let actors do what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
That's nonsense.
Yeah.
Well, and ironic considering that none of those actors got to do what they wanted to do in that movie either.
Yes. Hello.
I mean, I remember when it was coming out because, of course, I was a huge fan at that point, and the original franchise had been done with.
Right.
And Perkins was gone. I wasn't opposed to the idea, especially because I liked Gus Van Sant's work up until that point. And I thought the trailer they cut for it is actually really a cool. Still to this day, I think it's got a pretty awesome trailer.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that.
I think the trailer is really good because I'm like, oh, this looks kind of interesting. Yeah. And I don't know where I heard it, but there was a rumor, the whole shot for shot thing. I remember at the time hearing a rumor that, oh, it's shot for shot up until the shower scene and then makes a radical left turn. And I was like, that's awesome. All right, cool. Mm-hmm. I could be down with that.
There was that rumor.
Yeah. Oh, so you remember that too?
Yeah. Oh, there definitely was that rumor. And I was praying that was true.
Me too, because
but everything I was being shown or being,
it's
being
possible
told,
they meant that the thing we were talking about before, which is that they show things that in Hitchcock's version are repressed. Norman's looking through the peephole and he's actually masturbating.
Right.
Which doesn't,
which is something that's also kind of weird to watch on screen anyway. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just one of those acts that seems kind of weird, and especially in that kind of a movie, in a big studio kind of movie.
Gus had definitely done that in films before.
But in an indie film, there's something that can actually work. I don't know. It's a strange, and also it's Vince Vaughn, and he just, it feels like he's trying to play crazy rather than play a guy who's trying to hold back the crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
This guy's trying to actually bring out the crazy, and then he's watching her and she's actually nude. So we actually see nudity. And so these are the things that in Psycho, and we mentioned how it's, deeply Freudian because everything's being pushed down. And if it comes up even a little bit, you have to stab. You have to kill it. You have to break it down. And in this film, it's like, no, he's masturbating. And as you were backstage, the first thing he said, Stephen said was, well, if he masturbated, he doesn't have to kill her.
Yeah. What's the reason? We got that out of our system.
It's pretty basic psychology.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, and also the film, we are bagging on it, by the way.
But we're not bagging on Gus. We're just bagging on the work.
We love his work.
Yeah,
but look, one of the things that makes kind of a lot of the movies that I love so wonderful is that there are things held back. There are things unexplained. There are things left to the imagination. Many people, I remember, again, being in the backseat of my parents' car where a friend of my mother's with whom she worked had seen Psycho and was saying, "Oh, Evelyn, Janet Leigh is completely. You see everything. And that I think is really telling."
Halloween Texas Chainsaw Massacre, people always think
Yes.
they
Yeah.
saw it all. I just
Yes.
saw Texas Chainsaw the other day, you see nothing.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
a little speck of
It's
blood.
like it's the least gory film
Yeah, it's
ever.
a hook. You see a woman going towards the hook, and then you don't see the person going on the, and it's and Halloween more than any. It's one of the cleanest horror movies, and yet everyone probably thinks they're seeing knives being put in people. And
I was talking with David Fincher the other day. How's that for a name
yeah,
drop?
I like good
And-
start.
And he,
Should have led with that.
and he, next time, let's do it again.
Me and Fincher were.
And, no, it wasn't like that at all. But he was talking about Seven and how people all the time come up to him and say, "How dare you have Gwyneth Paltrow's head in a box?" Of course,
yeah.
that
You
would
don't
get
actually see it.
you don't,
Yeah.
but they keep thinking that you do. But that's when you know you've engaged the audience. You've
The emotion sold it. Yeah.
yeah, the hunter gets captured by the game. You go into the theater looking, for rowdy good time, but the director makes you the accomplice, and that's when you know you've really got them.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why everyone at home, every single person listening to this knows Hitchcock's name, and not every single person out there knows Herschel Gordon Lewis's name.
That's true.
Because even though Herschel Gordon Lewis is doing something original for that, people don't really want to see that. Like he's doing, oh, well, no one showed the gore, so I'll just make the films that show the stabbing, the intestines.
Yeah.
But the reality is we don't necessarily really want to watch that.
It's true.
Some people do.
Yeah, no. And
Which is why-
and I like his film. They're fun, but they're not the same thing. They don't incorporate us. They don't need our mind to finish the sentence. And whereas other films use us as an audience to be part of the discussion of the film. If you
I
know what I
want
mean.
you to know that
That's your phone,
my phone
is
is
it?
ringing, and I think it's Van Sant.
Oh my God.
that would be
Right
incredible.
now,
Ears
that would
ringing.
be
But it's not a live
crazy.
show, so you can pick that up if it's Vincent. I have some questions.
We have
I do have questions.
I have my masturbation clouds theory that I was discussing before the show started.
Lay that
I
on
need to
him and
ask
see
him
what he
about.
does.
Yeah.
It would be
my,
interesting.
my final thoughts on the remake is just the thing that bummed me out about it, and which is kind of the desire why years later I think I delved into doing something about the original Psycho franchises. I remember going to see it like opening night, so pumped and excited and hoping that it was going to be something great. And the audience just, from the moment Vince Vaughn shows up on screen, everyone's giggling and everyone knows he's the psycho. It's like right off the bat, it's like not even a surprise. And then worse is like when he shows up with a blonde wig instead of the actual, his reveal is supposed to be this terrifying moment. Everybody laughed. A full house of people started laughing.
There's moments that
And
felt
his
more like a
reveal.
John Waters film.
And I just,
than-
I felt embarrassed.
Yeah.
I was like sinking in my seat like, no, that's
And
not
also,
it.
there's no life to the audience. The audiences are so quiet. The ones
That's
I went
true.
to, quiet, bored. Like it didn't have the tension, and you're like, well, how can you not have the tension if you have the same? It's the same movie, isn't it?
Yeah, but
Same
it's not.
score.
But it's not because, as you said, that there's life behind a movie.
Yeah, and I mean, I've
And
seen
that pulse
the
wasn't there.
original on the big screen since, and
Yeah.
for some reason, I mean, obviously, people going to see that want to see that particular film, but
Right.
it's definitely got more of a vibrance in life than any of the other ones.
Are you someone who was ever interested in? I know we've written down just a handful of films because obviously it was the kind of the first postmodern. It became what a slasher film. More or less, it kind of starts copying. Did you ever follow any of those trends, or did your interest in horror was that mostly when you were, young, because it was transgressive?
No, I still like horror movies, but they don't scare me. That's
Yeah,
the problem.
yeah.
I
It's very rare once you watch a lot of them.
I've seen a couple of Korean and Japanese films that I thought, okay, something's happening here.
Yeah,
This I like.
yeah.
I love the Korean film Mother.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was extraordinary. You need to do something different to get me.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, with ghost stories, I'm not afraid of old people.
Mm.
And then ghost stories always pull old people in vintage clothing. Terrifying. Children, kids are all right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
The live ones I'm more scared of. Not the
right.
ghosts.
Look, it's tough to, everything's been done, and
Right.
it's tough to do something different. I heard you guys talking about the Babadook, and I'm looking forward to that. But I think, did I pronounce it correctly?
Yes, you did. Babadook.
Babadook. Well, it's Australian. So
It is Aussie. Yeah,
I'm scared.
Babadook.
Babadook.
Now where's mine?
It's like Marmaduke.
No, they actually say Babadook. 'Cause
Yeah,
that's
it's
what
Babadook.
it is.
Yeah,
yeah.
probably do.
Duck.
So
Yeah.
so I see everything with hope,
Right.
and usually walk out surly.
Were you going to the movies? We talked to somebody last week, which was interesting for us, who saw a lot of these classics when they came out first time. Exorcist, Evil Dead.
I saw The Exorcist.
Do you remember what those reactions were seeing those when they first came out? And
yes. Yes, because I saw The Exorcist on 42nd Street when 42nd Street was really the deuce. Yeah. And it was weird and sexy and crazy. And I went with 6 friends, and it was a largely black audience. It was epic.
Loud, I bet. Yeah.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was brilliant. Funnily enough, the stuff that scared me the most in The Exorcist was all medical. It was when they were putting that child through torture.
Yeah, interesting.
That relates to my own past, but it was horrifying because it was so real.
Right, and because he has that background in documentary filmmaking, which
and it
serves well.
It felt straight up clinically scary to me, and the audience was really with it. When the crazy juju starts happening, reactions varied. There was a lot of laughter, riotous laughter. But there was also, there's a lot of riotous laughter when I saw Psycho too. There's a lot of really nervous.
Yeah, I think that goes hand in hand with horror sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's great. It's therapeutic.
Yeah.
Exorcist though it's a lot of years later after Psycho, but it was full out let's party horror. All the stuff with the Catholic Church, I think really got to people. That stuff was scary. Yeah. To people, suicides, throwing selves out windows. Are we spoiling anything? No,
I don't think so.
Not with this crowd.
But the power of Christ compelling you is a big deal. That stuff, I think people were shrieking, really being with the movie. But that was a really great experience. And I saw a lot of horror movies on 42nd Street. I remember seeing, this is not a horror movie, but Whatever Happened to Aunt Alice. And you never heard such hooting and hollering.
Is that the Debbie Reynolds one, or is that the...
That's What's the Matter with Helen. No, this one's Geraldine Page and Ruth Gordon. Campy as all hell.
Robert Aldrich or Curtis Harrington?
Robert Aldrich, yeah.
They did all those,
but if you want to, so and then I saw The Exorcist again in Boston, in a very Tony Chestnut Hill theater with women with blue hair, and there was outrage. There was religious outrage. There were people picketing outside the theater. I remember very clearly.
That's got to be exciting to go to a movie where people are so angry. Like every time I see old newsreel about that, or Maniac, or these movies that groups of people went to shut down, I feel like I would be excited to see.
We had picketing in my hometown.
I just never see anything like that anymore.
I can definitely remember a few films that had pickets.
Yeah.
No, I think it's great. I think it's one of the reasons like someone like John Waters had trouble continuing making movies, because the ability to shock people.
Right.
And the ability to get people involved is so changed. The audience dynamic is so changed. I wonder all the time what Hitchcock would do, were he mercifully younger, alive, able to choose. I have a theory that he would have chosen Gone Girl. He would have made that movie. He would have found a way to make that movie.
Makes sense why Fincher's doing it then,
yeah. But how would a Hitchcock exist in the era of Twitter and Facebook?
He would have a huge Twitter following because his little one-liners would be gold.
He would just be insulting everyone, and they would love it.
Yes, indeed. But how would you preserve a surprise?
Yeah.
For example, how would you keep anything?
Weirdly enough, I think he would find a way. Of all the filmmakers, I feel like he would reinvent himself.
Canny.
Depending on the timing.
Or he could be like a Tarantino where he just doesn't do it. He never does social networking. He rarely does
he seems like he would need that connection to an audience.
Like
I don't think Tarantino cares about an audience. I feel like he's like, I'm going to make my film in a vacuum. Here it is. Hope you like it. If you don't, oh well. Whereas I don't think
for Hitchcock, just judging by his personality, where he needed the constant affirmations,
which is fun.
Twitter followers are a great way to do that.
Yeah.
Well, he used to love to get letters. In those days, people would actually write letters of outrage. and they're hilarious. I mean, if you get to read the Psycho letters, there, I've been going to your pictures ever since you started making pictures. I will never set foot in a theater again after that disgusting display of Psycho. It's outrageous. You should be ashamed of yourself. And the doctors who would take him on, pupils in the eyes should be dilated. Blood should be coagulating at a different rate. We still have those people. But you're right. He liked the dialogue with the audience. He used to, he used to love to slip into theaters and just listen to the reactions as opposed to actually have to sit with those people. Mm-hmm. God forbid. He didn't like mingling with the rabble. Let's face it. Those characters in Psycho were from outer space as far as he was concerned. No, I mean, really, he didn't understand.
He liked the Swiss chalet or wherever he used to go once a year. I remember reading about that.
Well, he didn't, he would vacation in Gstaad. He didn't know from a motel in Phoenix. That's why one of the reasons he would send out his crews to find out everything. He needed to know. He really wanted to know, what would a secretary have in her drawers, not her pants. That is her. Well, that too. But what books would she read? What magazines would she read? And that's another reason that he loved Janet so much, because she really came with this little booklet where she found an entire backstory for Marion, what perfume she would wear, and all of that wasn't my sin. That was my invention. But the point being, Janet did her homework, and she was taught that at MGM, and he thought that was touching, that she cared that much to not to read the novel, to read the screenplay, but also to come up with her own idea. How did her parents die? What was her relationship to Lila? Who was the boss? Who made more money? Mm-hmm. Janet had all of that in her book, and that's adorable and touching. That's what Scarlett picked up on. Yeah. I need to please you. I really want to please you. This is my shot. He liked people who wanted to please him, and he wanted to please audiences. He wanted to, be connected with them. He wanted to know what they thought. But he also knew he had to be a step ahead of them. So what you were mentioning earlier, other pictures he wanted to do. I always say pictures because he did. They were always going to move the needle. He wasn't going back.
And Frenzy is a sign of that.
Yeah, he didn't want to go back to that. Right. He thought Psycho was a reinvention, and The Birds was, an elaboration on that reinvention. So, he had Ernie Lehman working on a science fiction movie. He had other writers working on other kinds of things. Like one was a disaster movie, like a real.
That makes sense. I could see him.
I could see that.
Real disaster movie. So it's like, I'm not going back there again. But he constantly got stepped on by Universal. I wish he'd never gone there.
What was his biggest personal disappointment of the things? Was it Marnie? Like in terms of how people receive? I mean, obviously. The reception of Vertigo obviously would have been crushing, but in terms of like how the final film came out, do you know if he was ever, hurt by?
I talked with him about Marnie. He washed his hands of it. He had washed his hands of her. Right. He wanted nothing to do with her. He had washed his hands of the movie. Honestly, Joseph Stefano wrote this first draft of Marnie, and as he told me, once he lost Grace Kelly in that role, he really lost interest because, there was no other way for him to get on screen the kind of thing he needed to do and the kinds of ways he wanted to push the censors without the imprint of Grace Kelly, who could have made it okay. And
also by that time, I don't know if the movie is at all accurate, but the girl would have said they were antagonistic towards each other by then, so you couldn't draw things out of each other that you would have needed to. She would have needed to have trusted him completely, to give what he would have needed.
I think.
I don't know if that's obvious.
I think that the development in Tippi Hedren, and others have said it, and critics have said it of the time, in terms of it being an actress from The Birds to Marnie, is astonishing. I've never seen anyone improve that much. I think.
Yeah, Marnie's she's really interesting.
There are whole sequences in Marnie where she's better than Grace Kelly, I think, could ever have been. Yeah. She's extraordinary. his idea was to keep doing things that didn't repeat what he'd done before, and rather than this is the Hitchcock of this era, to reinvent himself with each picture, but he kept getting stepped on by Universal. They wanted him to do Airport. They wanted him to do Earthquake.
Right.
Or Lou Wasserman wanted him to lay the blame where it belongs. And so he got outstripped by time and by health and by he missed movie stars in the end. He really not so much wanted to pay those salaries, but he wanted people who jumped off the screen, who were larger than life. I know there's not a lot of that. And it started in the 70s. People started not to be that anymore. And, people talk about, well, who would he cast now? Beats me. I think there are a few people that he would cast. I think he would cast Tom Hardy, for example, in a second. I think he would get what that thing is, what that insane, interesting thing is. I think he would have used Charlize Theron probably at a certain point in his career. But we'll never know that, will we?
Right.
Ironically enough, George Miller used them both.
That's true.
Yeah.
He did.
George Miller he's a great movie maker.
Yeah. That's interesting.
He's a great movie maker.
Yeah, we never talked about Shadow of a Doubt either, but
Well, there's a direct influence for David Lynch.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Blue Velvet is for sure. Yeah. But I mean, that's for people who are looking for that one Hitchcock film they might not have seen. It's just so great. It's so dark and the humor is very subversive.
It makes a mockery of the American family.
Yeah.
It just shreds it.
And I don't know if I ever knew how good an actor Joseph Cotten was, because every time I see him in Wells stuff, I feel like he's kind of pigeonholed.
Yes.
And yet when I saw that film, I just thought he was so funny and likable, and then it just opened him up as an actor. It's a great film. I think, the one that disappoints me the most, I always think, is probably Spellbound. The dream stuff's interesting with Dali, but I always felt like the film itself feels they're people talking about these psychological new breakthroughs, and they're just talking about it. And I felt like if you got rid of all the dialogue, maybe then you would have had some heat. It's just one of those films that, it didn't capture it for me. But
yeah, no, I know what you're saying. To more directly answer your question, though, I think probably the biggest disappointment of his career, aside from Grace Kelly's leaving him and not ever getting William Holden to be one of his leading men, was not being able to film Mary Rose, the James Barrie play that he fell in love with it when he saw it in the 20s, that he always wanted to do, that he brought up with Ingrid Bergman, with Grace Kelly, and with Tippi Hedren. It's a ghost story, but it's not like a ghost story that we're accustomed to. It's really the sequel to Vertigo. It's deeply troubling. And Jay Presson Allen, the woman who did a draft and did the shooting script for Marnie, did a really good job on the screenplay. And Universal wouldn't let him do it. When I was in his office, I saw that there was a file from Mary Rose, even in 1980. And it was interesting because, you don't know me, but now you sort of do. I said, would you open that file? I'm just curious what's in it. It was right on his desk. I mean, how could I not ask? And the first thing in it was a photograph, an 8x10 glossy of Meryl Streep. And that's who he was thinking of. He never stopped thinking of, I've got to get the girl to play Mary Rose. The girl was Audrey Hepburn. That's who needed to play that role. The only woman who could probably have brought it off, because it's a woman who disappears on her honeymoon. And she comes back and she hasn't aged, but everyone around her has.
Oh, interesting.
And as he said to me, it's a story about the dead. I mean, we all want them to come back, but what would we do with them if they did?
Interesting.
So,
yeah.
You might have seen it, but there was a French horror film that took that exact.
Yes.
Sometimes they come back.
Yes.
No.
Oh, no,
that's not the title.
Sometimes they come back.
That's the
It's
Tom
Stephen King one.
What is it called?
Isn't it they came back?
return? Yeah.
I forgot the title. I know the movie that you mean.
Yeah, it is interesting though because it's not uniformly, it doesn't completely work, but it is interesting to see what would you do. You know, your loved one, you've moved on, you got divorced. You know,
yeah, jobs have been given away, and
but they're not zombies. They're just come back. They're ready to get back into life.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
What have you been doing since I've been
yeah, it's very unnatural.
God, you got old.
Yeah.
You know, really quickly, why don't we before I get to some questions?
Yeah, we have some audience questions.
You know, I'm always curious. The thing with Hitchcock, I mean, because he has so many films, I've obviously not seen them all. I'm trying, but you know, a big part of that is that I usually
envy you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fun. I usually wait till they screen on the big screen because I like seeing them that way. Yeah. You know, but and then I have a bunch of the box sets and all that on Blu-ray. Sure. But if you had to recommend a couple of, say, maybe some of the obscure ones or some of his earlier work, some of the stuff that's not as easily accessible as, you know, stuff that's in his box sets all the time. Are there any films in particular that you think people like us should seek out?
Well, we just mentioned one. I think Shadow of a Doubt. For those who haven't seen it, if you listen to it, if you get what's going on underneath and between the lines, that's as remarkable a movie as he ever made.
Also, one of his that was his personal favorite of his own.
Well,
correct?
there were wonderful things about it. He worked with Thornton Wilder, the great playwright, and he loved working with them. It's really interesting the numbers of gay writers that he worked with and worked really especially well with. We had it in the movie at one point, but he said it to several people that if it weren't for Alma, I probably would have gone to the other side.
Yeah.
And I've always loved that. I've always loved that about him.
Especially given the time period. That's really interesting.
Sure. And, and it's interesting because of David O. Selznick's comments about him that I put together somehow, where David O. Selznick said at one point, well, he's certainly not the kind of man you'd want to have along on a hunting trip. Or an out, and I thought, oh, what is he really saying there?
Interesting.
You know, as Mr. Selznick was in probably some Benzedrine, frenzy because he was such a Benny lover. But I really like his films, and so I tend to recommend things that require a little patience. There's a movie they made in England called Rich and Strange that I always see as a wonderful companion piece to The Man Who Knew Too Much. I mean, it's that, or even Torn Curtain. It's a movie about a couple, a married couple who they've reached a stalemate in their relationship, and it's one of the things that really fed when I was working on Hitchcock. But he loved that idea of people needing a shaking up. And it's a story about they take an ocean voyage and together, and they have affairs with other people on the ship, and then the ship starts to sink, and then it becomes a survival movie. It all doesn't work. There are things in it that are not very good, but it's a really personal movie for Hitchcock, who took many ocean voyages with Alma, it's a movie I like very much, and it's not really a thriller, but it's full of very weird Hitchcock humor, and racism too. But it's of its time very clearly. Wow, what else? I'm partial to watching. Oh, here we go. Well, okay, just come out of the closet and say it. I like to watch Under Capricorn without the dialogue. I like to turn off the sound and bathe myself in those extraordinary Jack Cardiff images. Jack Cardiff is one of my favorite cinematographers, and that movie is terrible in many ways and luscious and beautiful in many other ways. It's a movie in which Ingrid Bergman plays a variation on her role in Notorious. She's an alcoholic. It's Rebekah Down Under. And Margaret Leighton is Mrs. Danvers. Joseph Cotton is in it. Michael Wilding, but it has these long, sweeping, ravishing takes that take you through this Australian haunted house, where the curtains are billowing and candles are blowing, and It's a very, very strange movie, but it's very trippy.
I've never seen Family Plot, and it's been sitting on my Netflix queue forever. And I have one friend, Oren, who it's his favorite Hitchcock film, which seems to me strange, given that it's the it's the
okay.
Is there anything in that was Hitchcock
Family
even really
Plot?
actively directing at that point?
Sure.
Or, okay, well,
yeah. He really was actively directing at that point. The thing for
Bruce Dern, Karen Black,
yes, Barbara
psychics and
Barbara Harris,
money and
as the psychic, and William Devane replacing Roy Thinnes, who was fired by Hitchcock. But the thing is, I know a different version of that movie because I read the novel, which is wonderful, and someone ought to make it. And I read Ernie Lehman's first drafts of that picture, where it's a serious, strange, dark story about a family that's cursed, almost like the Kennedys, which is what the novel is about. And terrible things happen because the family did terrible things. And they keep happening again and again and again. And his script was really cool. And for whatever reason, Hitchcock really hurt him by saying, I want to make a light movie. And all that was Lou Wasserman telling him they had to do an upbeat movie to make audiences. Now, I think audiences would have followed him if he were making the kind of movie that he really wanted to make, with no holds barred. And that's the movie that they set out to make, he and Ernie. And he had a crisis of confidence, and he was afraid that Universal would shut off the spigots and not let him make any movie anymore. And so they tarted it up with, some good stuff and some not so good stuff. It has some of the worst process shots, cheapest process shots. Yay, Universal. Well,
Marnie's got some great ones. I like the Marnie ones. I find the Marnie ones like intoxicating.
I do too. I can't get enough of them. They're like, for me, they're like watching, Douglas Sirk.
And absolutely.
His backdrops. I'm obsessed with
the technical. You and Fassbender.
Yes.
and Todd
Haynes.
We could do a whole show.
Well, it's a merry little trio.
It is.
Or quartet if you want to join.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I love those too. But those are about, for me, the use of process is about something in Marnie. Not if you heard Hitchcock talk about it. I mean, what he told me was, my crew told me that would look all right, that it was not going to look like the way I kept telling them it's going to look fake. And they kept telling me it was fine. And then he said, fuck Universal.
Yeah, interesting.
Because they short shrifted in terms of how the color was processed and all. But, we don't have to worry about that because we just deal with the movie as it is. And, I find them ravishing to look at. And, the irony, of course, is that Tippi Hedren is a great writer. So they could have shot that stuff with her writing everywhere, but it was a Hitchcock movie, and he wanted her to look great. Yeah. So you don't take even a lovely woman or a handsome man in natural light and get them looking their best. Right. He wanted that, that artificial, heightened, misty look,
which I still think works for those films.
I do too.
I think that's what keeps you coming back.
Yeah, I do too. I didn't give you many recommendations.
We can always do. We could actually get some and put them on the page for people. We could actually ask you to maybe write.
All right.
That could be a fun interactive.
All right.
We haven't asked enough of you. Just give us a few hours of your time.
Before we get to fan questions, I had one really quick question that I don't know if you answer it in the book or if maybe I asked you already, but is there any reason? I'm sure they tried, but. Hitchcock never got to work with Anthony Perkins or Janet Leigh again after Psycho. Were there any projects post Psycho that maybe you talked to both of them about?
Yes and no.
Okay.
The yes is Anthony Perkins, who brought him a novel and thought they should do it together. Mm-hmm. And Hitchcock didn't like it. He really liked Anthony Perkins, as I said. More than liked him. And then Anthony tried to get him to do Psycho on Broadway.
Wow!
He thought
as a play.
Mm-hmm.
Wow!
When was that?
About 1968.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, the talks bogged down with, well, how do we do the shower scene? How do we get that kind of impact? I mean, you know, look, Anthony Perkins was trained in theater, and some of the best scenes in that film, like the parlor scene, as Hitchcock called it, it's pure theater.
Yeah.
That could have been done, you know, on stage. So those are the kinds of things that he remembers as being really rewarding, but you forget about, well, there's a drive.
Yeah.
You know, and there's, you know, today you could probably do the drive with projections, and you could do it in an interesting way. But really, when a man comes downstairs in a woman's dress, you're going to get big laughs.
Yeah.
Because it's Charlie's aunt, or it's Vince Vaughn.
Yeah.
It just, you know, it doesn't look quite okay. And even Anthony Perkins, it wouldn't look quite okay. And then, you know, you're sunk if you ever do anything that, you know, whether it's a remake or another version, you're going to be compared to the original, and they knew they weren't going to top Psycho. It hurt. I'm stammering like Norman Bates. It hurt Anthony Perkins very much because he thought it was a really good idea. But I mean, Hitchcock didn't want to do stage. So, you know, he brought him two things, and he kept continuing to bring him things. But what Hitchcock was really saying was, I can't use you again. You're so identified with Norman. And the same thing was true with Janet Leigh, who really wanted to work with him again and put herself up for Marnie. And, you know, but he met with her and said, the thing is, everyone's going to be expecting a trick. Yeah. You're going to vanish, or you're going to be, you know, and anything that pulled somebody out, and even one audience member out of the movie, he always felt, and he told Ernie this all the time, if I lose one person, I lose the audience, because that person gets restless and they start rattling their popcorn, or now they're texting, or they're, you know, so he, you know, his intention was, if I lose one person, that's it. So if somebody's thinking, wait, there's going to be, so.
Did he ever think about, obviously we can talk about the sequels at some point, but did he ever think about a sequel to Psycho? I mean,
no.
Okay, so that never came up in his lifetime.
No.
Not even
or
from
in
the
any
studio.
of his films, you know. Other
that
than,
one's the most obvious.
You know,
it does make sense.
He would do you know, he obviously remade The Man Who Knew Too Much, but
actually, Rear Window, I could imagine that character having another storyline. He's the one of the only characters from a film that, or Cary Grant, of course, in North by Northwest. But
yeah, I would agree.
They could have more adventures.
Yes, indeed they could.
As it were.
But then somebody has to be immobile again.
Right. Yeah, I broke my damn water buffalo.
Exactly.
Yeah,
or, you know, Vertigo. Oh, I'm having that dream again.
Right.
So, you know, especially in his later career, he was all about moving on. Find me the next thing. He was frantic. I have a friend who works at Universal, lovely guy, and one of his jobs was a thankless job of find Hitch something new. Yeah, and at one time, believe it or not, he got pretty intrigued by a Dean Koontz book called Whispers, and he had people putting out feelers, get it really cheap. You know, get it for what I got Psycho for.
That's like Kubrick too, right?
Yes.
Kubrick had a person who would call people and pretend to not be anything to do with Kubrick, just like, I have no money, I want to get the rights to this book. And he'd be like, all right, I got it.
Man.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, well.
I feel like the first half of Frantic by Polanski would have been, and I think the first half of that's actually really incredible.
Yes,
the second half is just kind of rubbish, unfortunately.
I
I feel like that first half is one of the only films I've seen in the last 20 years where I'm like, I think Hitchcock might have appreciated the tension that he built up with the wife disappearing.
I think so.
While you're in a shower.
There are those great shots of
Paris.
Now she's here, now she's not.
It really has a great start to that film.
Well, Polanski he's a master.
Yeah. But he's not on Locarno. I just read today that he pulled out of a big festival because they were calling him a pedophile, and there's all these protesters. He just said, I'm not going to go there.
Really,
why bother?
That's a losing proposition.
Yeah. There'll be another show one day.
Yeah.
Probably not on the soil.
No, probably not. But no, I think he really felt that those two people he could not do anything with again.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense.
Vera, though, I mean, Vera Miles, he did have on a short list for Marnie. So he was continuing to think of her. And, and the added advantage of, I've got her under contract, it's really cheap. He was very, he didn't like paying actors salaries. I mean, let's just, be blunt about it. He didn't like paying Cary Grant that much money for overtime on North by Northwest. So Psycho was really a reaction, in part, a reaction to all that. Why would we why would we deal with that again?
Right.
But for Marnie, I mean, he kept offering it to Cary Grant. Bird's the same thing.
Are there any good Sean Connery stories about working with? I can't see those two. I cannot imagine those two working together.
Hitchcock and Sean Connery?
I just can't visualize the conversation, even though I'm sure they're both from the UK. So, but I'm curious how they would have gelled.
They gelled so beautifully that
really?
He offered him a 7-picture contract.
Wow. That's awesome.
He was his favorite leading man after Perkins.
Wow. I mean, Sean Connery is pretty damn charming. I can't imagine,
Well,
that is interesting.
Not only charming, but completely irreverent, which is how you really got to Hitchcock, which is how I got to Hitchcock. I mean, he liked the people who would trespass, who would spit in his eye, who would stand up to him. And Connery adored him. There are these beautiful pictures of them with their arms around each other all the time. They're very touching. And Hitchcock wanted, in fact, if you've seen the film The 39 Steps, there's the character Richard Hannay. There are a series of books that the novelist John Buchan wrote about Hannay. And for years, Hitchcock wanted to do The Three Hostages, which is a bang-up, great movie that somebody ought to make. No names. But he offered it to Connery, and Connery was going to do it, but they couldn't get the rights from the Buchan estate. So they loved each other. He was actually delighted because one of the thing that got him the job, Connery said, was that when he found out that one of his jobs was coffin polisher, Hitchcock just thought he just wanted to be on the set with him to talk about polishing one's coffin, so to speak. Wow. Yeah.
Well, we should open to the fans because we did get a few write-ins that we
nice.
We have
we don't always make it to. So
all right, let's kick it off with our friend BJ.
She's a good one.
This is a sort of weird question, but I'm genuinely and sincerely interested in our opinion. Psycho is undoubtedly the most influential film to the horror genre. Do you think Hitchcock and by proxy Norman Bates are responsible for the misconceptions presented in many popular horror films that followed that all cross-dressing males are evil, crazy, murderous? And she gives the examples like Sleepaway Camp, Silence of the Lambs, Insidious 2. It's true, I guess.
Dressed to Kill.
After that, it was just kind of like, if you dress up as a woman, you're crazy.
If you put the lotion on the skin.
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot of interesting, queer readings of Psycho and of Hitchcock in general. I don't think that Hitchcock was a homophobe, and I don't think that he equated cross-dressing with murderous impulses. Although he did have an earlier cross-dresser who was a killer in his British days. But, I think that's one reason why he was just done with Psycho. I mean, he didn't want to revisit any of that. He thought that story had closed in on it, on itself. I think great movies and movies that work spawn lazy movies. And I think there's a lot of homophobia in Hollywood. I think there's a lot of, just as there was in that room in the end of Psycho, where people really don't know what transvestite or transsexual or anything means. I think those stereotypes still exist, and I think people are lazy, and they go, okay, there must be something really murderous and terrible and psychotic wrong with you if you want to dress like a man or dress like a woman, depending on the gender.
I remember it hurt Lee Tamahori. Yeah. I'm from New Zealand, and Lee Tamahori is like one of our, especially at that time, he had made pretty much the most powerful film ever made, There Once Were Warriors, and it's such a macho movie. Culture coming from Maori culture, and that's a very macho film. It's very masculine. Sure. It's very tough. So when and he had done one of the Bond films, I think it was right after one of the Bond films, and it was a big report. Oh, he's been found walking Venice Beach in drag, and and really must have hurt his career and his reputation. But I remember feeling like back home it would be even worse than Hollywood because of the macho quality of things. And I remember when he came home, I remember seeing all these, it seemed like he was basically just people like, whatever. Like, forget about it. You're one of us. It's all
just
good.
eccentricity.
And that really impressed me at the time because it made me think that a culture had actually come away. Well, but it was interesting.
It's very interesting. But look at how the culture has changed to the extent that we have a director who has had his sex changed.
Right.
And it's like
maybe two. Well, I don't know. No,
actually more.
Yeah.
Well,
The Matrix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was talking to a friend about this. I don't know. So sorry if I'm way off. But Michael Cimino had changes. I just don't know what they were. I don't know. Michael Cimino made The Deer Hunter. Between then and now, he now looks like if James Wan was put in a prison camp for 20 years. That's how he looks now. But back in the day, he literally looked like kind of like Francis Ford Coppola, or just anyone.
Wow.
When he was making giant changes between those periods where it could be plastic. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not my place.
Well, I do, but I'm not.
Okay, you don't have to. Yes, it's not a gossip show.
No.
Well, the one point I wanted to bring about that question, which I thought was interesting, is obviously you see what's successful in a horror movie, and without actually analyzing the movie, you think, oh, what did they do in that? Oh, that's scary. Let's just do that again. And one of the things that always frustrated me when I started to look into Anthony Perkins' filmography, I didn't, typecasting meant nothing to me as a kid. He's great in this movie. I want to see more movies with him.
Sure.
And it always got disappointing when, look, I don't think Ken Russell is necessarily a homophobe or anything like that, but I see Crimes of Passion, which is a pretty weird, bizarre, cool movie.
Yeah.
And I fucking hate the ending. I hate what he does to Perkins at the end of the movie.
You should.
Which is the same thing. It's just... that's.
I remember the colors of it, but I don't
spoiler. But if you've seen Psycho, then you. But I always get frustrated that Perkins had that affected him more than people. That, and we've talked about Edge of Sanity before.
I love that movie
which is an alright movie, but it's kind of they're like, why don't you do that Psycho thing again, but as Dr. Hyde?
I don't know. See, I think it's much more of like a traditional story where he's playing a serial killer, but I don't think he's like channeling Psycho in that one. At least I didn't feel it. And the cross-dressing thing doesn't come in. There's definitely some homosexual overtones in Edge of Sanity, though, that could be misconstrued.
It's a very perverse movie.
It is a very perverse movie. But yeah, I could see it being misconstrued. But for me, when I watched Edge of Sanity, I never saw a connection. I just saw like, wow, no one else knew that Perkins did this. This is pretty amazing.
There's a film that I don't even think it has a proper release, and it's Criminal. I really like the director, Frank Perry. Play It As It Lays has a Anthony Perkins performance that I think is his best performance. And anyone who's now, with what just happened with Robin Williams, people who can't understand depression, you watch that film. He has this character. I think he's the director or the producer. I can't remember. And he's kind of he's not even the lead, but every time he pops up, he's portraying a depressed director, or I think it is producer actually, and he's a good friend of the actress, and they have these very intimate conversations. But man, there's something about it. It felt so real.
Well, he and Tuesday Weld were such good friends,
right? And they were in Pretty Poison. Is it called Pretty Poison?
Yeah.
Which is one of Emerson, and that's a great movie.
I love that.
But
movie.
Those two films together would make a fascinating double feature. I mean, that would just be like mind blowing. But I don't know why Play It. I have no idea about the rights. Why that film's hard. But it's about Hollywood. It's written by the great novelist. Who wrote
Joan Didion.
Joan Didion did The Year of Magical Thinking. And stuff.
Who directed Pretty Poison, by the way?
Noel Black.
Noel Black. He only made like, what was it?
He just died.
I've seen at least, I think I've seen one other thing.
There's a really good print of Play It As It Lays because ArcLight showed it.
Yeah, no, I think the New Bev does show it.
American Cinematheque showed it, but somebody showed it.
But if you can track it down, there's just some roles. And then I didn't know he wrote that film with Stephen Sondheim, which is just hilarious. The Last of Sheila is just so playful and funny.
And he was supposed to write Clue.
I see. That makes sense. Well, those films are very similar.
Yeah, that would have been really interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, he's in some really bad movies I love.
Yeah,
I mean, he's in Mahogany with Diana Ross, and he's side splitting in it.
Yeah,
it's side splitting,
right?
And it's so bad, it's bliss.
Did you watch any of the and we can throw around obviously some of these ripoffs, but have you seen many of these ripoffs Like, did you watch
With
these?
him?
No, the more like the slasher films of the. Pardon me,
sure.
of the 80s. Did you? I mean, even Friday 13th, right? Number 2 has the scene where he's got the little mother head on the thing
And
with the
the mother
candles.
talks to him
Mother's
throughout.
telling him again. It's basically mother's
No,
controlling.
Yeah.
Well,
I didn't even think of the Friday
him to
13th.
kill.
But I mean, even in the almost immediate aftermath of Psycho, they were already, bandwagon jumpers. There was Hammer did a couple of them, and a couple of them not too bad.
Yeah.
There's Scream of Fear has a real Psycho sort of thing. Oliver Reed did Paranoiac. There are a whole bunch of them, and I've seen them all.
Did you see Dressed to Kill?
Yes.
Brian De Palma's, yeah.
Yeah.
That's one that we can't really talk about that without a spoiler because it's
it's freaking Psycho pretty much.
Yeah,
and I remember
but
I said at the top of the show, it's weird because when I was younger, I couldn't get into De Palma movies just because I thought they were all ripoffs. But now as an adult, I'm able to separate them. And honestly, Dressed to Kill showed at the New Beverly a couple years ago. And it was like one of the greatest theatrical experiences I've ever had. For some reason, like I was able to separate my memory of what I thought it was and just enjoy it. Especially the reveal right in the middle of the movie with Angie Dickinson's sexual partner.
Oh, yeah.
That brought the house down in a way that I've
I mean, I think
it's pretty.
She's
actually
really
cool.
good in it.
her walking around the art gallery is something I think even Hitchcock would have quite gone, I would have lifted that, But then a lot of it,
Isn't it Vertigo?
It is. Yeah, well, okay, basically. But there's a couple I would defend, and I think one is, we have Peeping Tom, which is really, I think Bad Education by Almodovar is one of the most Hitchcockian films I've seen in the last 20 years, and it's in all the right ways.
And The Skin I Live In.
Exactly, both of them. And then my favorite film, and I actually just love this film in general, but I think it's also it's really a Psycho, is Santa Sangre by Jodorowsky, and it's
great.
It is a great movie, and it's all based on fact. So it's not like he's lifting Psycho because he actually met It's an amazing story where he says he was sitting in an office in, I don't know if it's Argentina or Chile, and he's turns and starts talking to this man, and this man turns to be the main character of Santa Sangre, who was a guy who literally had killed many women and buried them in the backyard and had these awful dreams of them all wearing like bridal white and coming back to life to get him. So that was directly from sitting next to a guy, and he wrote that. But in Santa Sangre, he has basically imagined his deceased mother, and he's the arms of his mother. I mean, it's probably the most Psycho.
Her hands actually appear.
It's just got such artistry behind it, that film, that it's.
Well, but there's the difference.
Yeah,
that's where you separate the nonsense from the
exactly. They're not just exploiting the twist. They're elaborating on how it could work.
If the director brings something extraordinary and deep and weird and personal to the movie, then it becomes another kind of experience. Completely.
Yeah. There's ones that like don't go in the house. All those ones are just literally a Psycho flashback. You'll have a guy burning woman, and then he'll literally show you a flashback, and it'll be the mother grabbing the son, burning his hand under a fire stove. You don't do this. And then he's it's amazing how they don't even try to change details. It's fun.
We're avoiding the elephant in the room, which is homicidal, which is Psycho.
Yeah. And Maniac too.
And Maniac.
Both versions are.
What about Straight Jacket? Would that be considered, or?
Well, again, the reverse of gender.
That's a different type, because in that case the mother is Psycho, if I'm remembering it correctly.
The daughter.
Thank you.
Oh, right there it is.
Joan Crawford.
Yeah, because Joan Crawford's the right one, but there was a lot of knockoffs of that one too. Because actually, I think it may have come afterwards. The Big Cube. Did anybody else see that one?
Oh yes.
But that was kind of the same. Like the kids are psycho, the mom's kind of insane,
that's
but
right.
the kids are more insane than the mom. So
that's sort of a diabolic thing where they're driving her.
Yeah.
Drive mommy crazy, and it's Lana Turner, so she's nuts anyway.
Yeah.
From the jump, but I mean. Success breeds many, many imitators. And I once asked Hitchcock what it felt like to have these Valentines to him. And I mean, I was being kind, saying Valentines. Right. And he said, well, I love being made love to.
Does that appear in a book? I hope that's written somewhere. Oh, that's just too good.
Yeah.
A couple more quick questions.
For saying it.
Damon Brazel on our page said, does anyone know whether it was Stefano or Hitchcock who came up with the idea of making Marion Crane the main focus for the first half of the film? I've heard different accounts. Just curious. Was that always...
It's a really good question. Well, you have to read the novel. Marion Crane is the person that you follow in the first part of the film. The difference is that, one of the many great things that Joseph Stefano did is he wrote her real scenes. He wrote the scene, the opening scene with the lover, where you really get what a dead end relationship this is, and how she loves him more than he does her. And Joseph Stefano's dialogue is so good. It's just so good. I mean, you wouldn't have gotten Janet Leigh to do it if Marion weren't. You don't get a major star to do a picture like that if she's not the focus. But I mean, the template is set down by Robert Bloch, and what's the cliche? Stefano brought it to a much higher, more refined, more character-driven level. I mean, his characters are really strong, and so you think the movie. I mean, if you go in cold and you don't know the story, back in the day, you would have thought, and Janet Leigh is playing this actress, you would have thought this movie is going to be about this woman and this guy who's kind of not good for her, and then she meets this other guy. He's a little weird, kind of cute. Maybe there's something could be there, and so you think, Hitchcock was playing on the audience. There was a compact back then with audiences, which is terrible things never happen to movie stars in movies. You don't, you get them up a tree and throw rocks at them, but you don't slaughter them in the shower.
It's actually kind of amazing that it took so long for that to be copied again when it's not really till Scream. When it opens with Drew Barrymore. I almost wish in that case that she had been in it longer. Like we had gone with her for maybe 20 or 25 minutes.
Right.
So we really feel, there's a Drew Barrymore movie. And then, oh my God. But there wasn't a lot in between that. Angie Dickinson, obviously,
sure.
in Dressed to Kill. But besides that, there aren't a lot of examples, maybe because it is so transgressive to cinema and audience participation. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's true. But but also the way we look at movie stars is so different now. I mean, back in that day, you went to a Janet Leigh movie. That was a thing you did.
Yeah.
That is the question. Are there any movie stars? Like, do people just go to, is George Clooney's name enough to guarantee that people just go because it's him? And it doesn't seem to be. But
some. But the difference is the affection. I think. I mean, I'm just remembering my parents,
right,
and their friends, and how they had real affection for, God forbid, Bing Crosby, but or going to see a Frank Sinatra movie. They genuinely liked these people,
right?
And so, in fill in the blank, Lana Turner, whoever it was, they liked them. They felt they knew them, and Hollywood catered to that because movie stars didn't step out of their comfort zone, really. So when you have somebody like Janet Leigh suddenly in a black and white movie being really naughty for that time, and then she's gone from the movie. I mean, I remember people in the theater when I saw it saying, "She's coming back, it's a trick," because they could not believe, or that she's the mother. I mean, you'd hear these people, and they were out of their heads. These people were, seriously, they were talking out of their heads because they were so stunned by what they saw that it was like coming out of them in an involuntary way. Yeah, which I thought I've never seen anything like that again.
The only modern equivalent they could do would be if The Walking Dead killed Rick. Whether you know anything about this, no. There's because of the mainstream, and I not just because it's actually
dead already.
Well, he's dead so inside. But the idea of like if there's I don't know how many million people watch that show. Is it 8 or 18? Whatever. It's huge. But to suddenly take away that one eyes of a story would probably be would create that same momentary disconnect. Like where do I look? I don't understand where I go now because that person's no longer there. But I don't think there are many examples of that in modern culture.
There's memes online begging people not to kill Rick.
So. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of characters. Sure. But anyway, it's just when you get that, it's a complicated thing.
It is. Yeah. It's a very complicated thing. And there has to be a likability factor. I mean, I like George Clooney. I like his work, but I think there are a lot of people who are jealous of George Clooney, so they have issues.
Right.
So it isn't. There isn't sort of the unalloyed kind of, compassion and empathy for movie stars that there used to be. We know too much.
I think we have some of them. I wish I remembered her name. Who's the girl from Hunger Games?
Oh, Jennifer Lawrence.
That's one that I think that there's like this unabashed love for amongst people.
Yeah, I'm.
Who knows if it'll
I'm
last?
sort of crazy.
I mean, she's so young. It's hard to...
but you know that the audience will turn on her.
Yeah, eventually.
It's going to happen because it's just the way people are. We build. I mean, I really like Jennifer Lawrence. I think she's the real deal. Sometimes she reminds. And when she did the last two movies, she reminded me of Angie Dickinson, like a young Angie Dickinson. I think a lot of her. But you know the way audiences are now, the way we are now. People are going to go, I'm fed up. Mm-hmm. Oh, she can't trip anymore at any award events because that's a gig. That's a thing she does. It's too bad. You just make a false step or a wrong step, or you make the wrong movie, or you date the wrong person, and the jackals start, nipping at your behind.
Yeah, Jack Nicholson strikes me as maybe the last. Tom Hanks, and you have these people who are more like actors than they are movie stars. I feel like Tom Hanks is more of a great actor than he's a great movie star. I don't know. In my brain, that makes sense. But Jack Nicholson feels like one of those people, him retiring feels like, oh, well, that every time he made a film, people went to the Jack Nicholson movie.
Because he's got was that larger than life.
Yeah.
He bit every role right on the neck.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of that. Everybody's too busy being too cool now.
Right.
Everybody sounds the same. They move the same. It's the distinctive people that I grew up with, and I'm kind of I'm hungry for that. I want to see the person whose face is off, but you can't stop looking at them, or they have something about them that there's a mystery there.
Right.
There's something that makes you keep looking and looking and looking. Anyway.
And maybe a real mystery. I think people like Anthony Perkins, people who you didn't really know what they're into. You don't know what their home life is like, but you got the surface part, and that's what all you got.
Yeah.
But you were always wondering, I wonder what they're really like in person.
And
now we know everything.
Yeah, and in those days, there were the fan magazines that lied because the studios were running them, and the writers were mouthpieces. So you didn't read about Tab Hunter and Anthony Perkins and their matching Thunderbirds. You read about he was dating Venetia Stevenson or Natalie Wood or somebody, bull.
Right.
But, that's what people wanted to believe then. And they probably still want to believe that now.
Yeah. There's just too much information now about everything in life. There is maybe too much. Yeah.
Let's see, two more. One from Ken Hanley. He's got one for me and you. The question to you is, I heard a rumor that a while back that Martin Balsam on Psycho was actually a late replacement as Arbogast, as Hitchcock had originally wanted a hard-jawed, more imitating actor for the role, so that the murder would be even more of a shock. Any truth to this?
I thought you were going somewhere else with that question. You can imagine I've gotten it before, but
Ken's one of our employees at Fango, by the way.
So be nice.
No, I am. I'm going to be nice because he avoided the thing that I usually get, which is that George Reeves, who played Superman, was supposed to play that role.
Yeah,
ignoring, of course, the fact that George Reeves, Hitchcock would never have cast. Let's just start with it. Hitchcock would never have cast George Reeves. Beyond that, he was dead by the time Psycho was being made. So, I mean, it's a small detail.
It's a technicality.
Right.
Yeah.
And you couldn't CGI him then.
Yeah.
So, but no. Look, he would always draw up a list of people, and he usually didn't get his first choice. Lana Turner was going to be Marion Crane. That would have been the logical money choice then. Luckily, we got Janet instead. That worked out really well. Thank you. But there were other actors that he had to think of other actors for Norman Bates too. What if Perkins had said, "I don't think so"? That was cutting pretty close to the bone.
Yeah,
that was a very brave thing for him to do. He knew how good the role was. I think he also felt he didn't have too much to lose, the way Hollywood was sort of treating him anyway. And critics were treating him really badly, which hadn't been the case on Broadway, where he got great reviews. But There were a couple of other people who were mentioned for Arbogast, but Martin Balsam so impressed Hitchcock in other movies and on TV. He had an everyman quality about him, but he was also very city. Martin Balsam is one of the great treasures of Psycho. Really.
Yeah, he's so great in it. I mean, the parlor scene with him and the interrogation scene with him and Anthony Perkins is like,
it's a work of art,
acting at its finest.
Yeah, the two of them they're just swinging for the fences. And,
and I think it's on the Birds DVD or maybe Blu-ray as well. But isn't there some kind of screen test that he did with Tippy?
Yeah,
and he had Martin come in and act with her. Well, which is also great.
Oh, it's completely great. And paid him a lot of money too, by the way, which is also great. Here's what he wanted to do with women, and he did it from the time in the 40s, and the smart ones understood what he was doing, and the dumb ones misinterpreted it. And make of that what you will. With that particular thing, he wanted her to be on her high horse, to be dressed beautifully, to have her head tilted in just the right way. And he wanted, a kind of nebbishy but sexy guy to knock her off her high horse. And he wanted a really good actor and a good improviser. And that was sort of brilliant because he could have hired Sean Connery or Rod Taylor and said, let's do this screen test. And she would have not been knocked off her high horse. And you see her, she's very good in that screen test. And you see her, you see Martin Balsam throw her and make a few semi-risque comments along with Hitchcock. And she just goes, okay, I'm rolling with this. And so it was very smart. It was very, very smart. I just wish, again, he'd been able to use Martin Balsam in another film, but you can't.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
We have 12 Angry Men and thankfully Death Wish 3, which is...
Thank God we got Death Wish 3.
I love that movie.
I think
Martin Balsam's great.
Well, he takes down the block. Michael Winner. Him and Michael Winner, they take down a whole block of people, yeah.
And a quick question for me from Ken was regarding Psycho 2, is it true that after Perkins initially turned down the film, is it true that after Perkins initially turned down the film, the sequel was refashioned to take place in an age, if he had turned it down, the sequel was refashioned to take place at an age where he would be considerably younger, 10 years after the original. To the best of my knowledge, and this is from all the conversations I've had with Tom Holland and a few email interactions with Richard Franklin, I don't think there was ever a point where they would have done the sequel without Anthony Perkins.
Impossible.
I don't think you could.
The only rumor I heard, and when I brought it up to Tom, he didn't remember it because he was the writer on it, so it might not even have come to him. Is there was a rumor that if Perkins had turned it down, they would have thought of somebody like Christopher Walken, which at the time sounds insane, but kind of awesome, like in an alternate reality.
Because if you're thinking like Dead Zone, this would have been like around.
Yeah, I think it's Dead Zone was right after this.
Yeah,
so it was before that time period. So it would have been
around like the Dead Zone. Christopher Walken, I can see him totally being
but that was
but he had done Annie Hall, and that's already crazy. He's already gone crazy.
That was strictly rumor, and again, Tom didn't remember that at all. Their idea was, well, let's write it. It's at the time a cable movie, and it was when Perkins responded to the script that he's like, oh, I'm in, that all of a sudden it became a cable movie and it went to a theatrical movie. It's like, oh, and that was because just so many people, the press got so excited by, Perkins is coming back to play this role. So
it's so interesting how for years he wouldn't talk about Psycho and he had to.
Which is what surprised me when you brought up the play in '68.
Yeah, it did me too.
And then I heard, I don't know if it's true, but I heard a rumor, if the timetable's right, that he did that great gag, which is on YouTube on Saturday Night Live, kind of mocking the whole Norman Bates and the Bates Motel. And some, the story I heard is that Dan Aykroyd talked to him backstage saying, man, you were so great in that role. Like, you should do it again if ever the opportunity. And that was like right before Psycho 2 came about. So there's always these rumors that Dan Aykroyd's pep talk backstage at Saturday Night Live made him, comfortable with the decision.
You say you want to see something really scary?
Yeah.
Hilarious.
My favorite moment in a Psycho sequel, or my favorite little set piece, is the ice machine.
I love the ice machine because you're just waiting for him to grab a bloody cube, and you're just standing there, and you're like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
And it's kind of, I think Hitchcock would have liked that. I just think that's a really smart.
I always loved that character too, the one that he kills off there, because it's just like this crass girl.
Cat Shay, baby.
And they show her using the toilet, which again I think was kind of like pushing boundaries, because when I was watching it as a kid, I was like, I don't think I've ever seen anybody else pee before. And
in this original too, when she flushes stuff down the toilet in the original Psycho. Toilets. These aren't things we saw on screen.
That was another mind blower. Yeah. The sound that I remember in the theater, I can't even describe it, but people were so unsettled. Like,
from the flushing toilet in the original?
This is not okay. If there's a sound for, oh no.
Yeah.
You could feel
so interesting,
it
really is interesting.
The only way I can describe it is it felt like an entire audience becoming church ladies. It just, something's been transgressed here.
Right.
But once that toilet flushed, it felt like we're in for it. We're in for it. Oh, did you answer all?
Yeah, I did. Question? Yeah. And last question
You're
is from
much better at. You get a nice tight little button on your answers, and I just go weaving and waving.
Last question is from Scott Pliskin, who asks. He talks about
Snake.
Not Snake. No, but he has a picture of Snake as his avatar.
A picture.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you got that reference. I have another. You just went from like my respect was pretty high, but you went through the roof. Like I don't. How do you know so much about this and can get that reference? Well done.
Hitchcock's Psycho follows the novel for the most part fairly closely, but there are obviously big differences. In particular, Norman. Norman looks more like Lawrence R. Harvey. From Human Centipede 2 than he does Anthony Perkins.
Rather specific.
I doubt that there will be an attempt at a remake, but if there was, would you ever want to see a faithful adaptation of the book? Which I guess this goes for all of us, but I don't know.
I think the people at this table who answer things quickly should maybe speak first.
I don't.
I mean, the whole point is he's kind of like a 40-year-old balding, overweight guy in the book. And
who drinks,
and has, I think there's like 3 personalities, if I'm not mistaken. He like reverts to a little boy in the book as well. I
feel like that's what all the ripoffs have kind of ripped off.
Yeah, and
I feel like all the 80s have variations of that.
It would be very difficult to sympathize with a character like that, which is why Anthony Perkins was kind of like I don't think I would ever want to see it. I think the closest I'd ever seen it was really interesting was back in, I want to say, the early 90s. Innovation Comics was a small label that was doing horror comics. They're doing like Dark Shadows and stuff like that. They did a 3-issue limited series of Psycho, which essentially just told, it's just the movie. It's the movie version. And it's all these beautifully
the art
painted.
Is really nice.
The art's gorgeous. It's all these beautifully painted pictures. But it's so weird because, like, I mean, it's the shots from the movie, and Janet Leigh looks exactly like Janet Leigh. The only difference is, Norman Bates looks like the book version rather than that. And I remember online in the early days of Icons of Fright writing a little write-up on this thing saying, like, I don't understand why they would adapt the comic book and do all this beautiful illustrations and everyone looks like the actual actors except Anthony Perkins. The artist of the book, his name was Felipe... I can't remember his full name, but he actually contacted me via email saying that he had actually painted it to look like Anthony Perkins and that for some reason his people contacted Innovation and said he does not want his likeness to look like Norman Bates anymore.
Wow.
They're refusing it. Now, from what I've heard from people that knew Perkins, I think that was his people and not him directly.
Yeah.
Because I mean, at that, in 1990, 2 years before doing Psycho 4, I don't think he all of a sudden towards the end of his life had a problem with, being associated with that character. I mean, from what I discovered from,
I'm sure his people were because they were trying to get him cast in other roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but for a comic book, his likeness rights.
But they'd licensed the rights, right? Or not for his likeness, just for the concept of the story,
to
right?
do an adaptation of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But they use stills from the actual film because if you look at that art, you can see that there are direct.
Yeah, it's direct shots, and it's painted.
It doesn't qualify under satire laws, or I assume it was a licensed comic, actually.
Yeah. Well, for whatever reason, Perkins didn't approve of, or Perkins people didn't approve of his likeness in the comic book. So, but that's the only interpretation of Psycho I've ever seen that actually more in terms of Norman fits the book version more than anything else.
Sure.
So
I'm
that's
always against adhering to the book version. Like, there's rarely been. I mean, in this case, you were. That's not.
No, I know. No,
actually,
I'm
like a
No,
I'll call it like okay. But I mean, that's a well-researched book about his actual life, and then it's used and applied to the screen. But if it's an actual like narrative fictional work, it's rarely that I'm like, I wish they would have stuck to the book more. Usually there's reasons that they cut these things. And I mean, I always go to Forrest Gump as my example. If you actually read the Forrest Gump novel, he's not at all a likable character. He's just really quite disgusting, and he's overweight, and his mental capabilities are seriously more hindering than they are in the movie. It's
well, then I never want to read that book because that's a wonderful movie.
It is. It goes from being quite charming and adorable to just kind of like a very sad story of this man struggling through life, trying, and these things are portrayed more as fantasies, and he's kind of bumbling through, and things keep happening to him, but he seems much more inept than he does in the movie. So,
well, even with Hitchcock, often if you read the novels on which the films are based, they're really quite different. Strangers on a Train is a really good example. It's a great book, but the movie's better. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's a movie. There was never talk from Hitchcock's point of view about Norman's being anything but a nice looking, sweet, confused, troubled guy who would fool the audience. I mean, he was casting, again, he wasn't directing, he was misdirecting. That's the point. Look over here while I'm doing this. So you get someone like Perkins who, the strange thing is that you watch Perkins in films before Psycho, he's doing the same thing. And it's so wrong. If you're doing The Matchmaker, and you're doing basically the basis for Hello, Dolly, and you're doing quirky, weird things, and you're making faces at your fellow actors, it's startling to see. I mean, you see every look that he did in Psycho, he had done already, sometimes inappropriately in other contexts. and then you find this confluence of the right role with the right director, with the right cinematographer, with the right leading lady, and it's like all the dimes are dropping, and you go, this is what it was supposed to lead to. But you in Strangers on a Train, you have a brilliant performance from Robert Walker as the killer, and that who knows what that would have led to, but he died. That's his last movie. And he was the same thing as Perkins in that he was the young romantic guy that Hollywood was trying to do something with and casting him with beautiful leading ladies. I mean, Perkins had, Sophia Loren and Audrey Hepburn, and they tried with everyone, and the audience was going, no, it just wasn't working. But then you get him in that role, and it's just, well, this is what you were born to do. Yeah. But what happens when nothing that comes after is at that level? That had to be so difficult for him.
Except Psycho 2, 3, and 4.
I think we're going to have to talk about them next episode.
Next time.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to close, I guess, with
Christopher Walken saying, we all go a little mad sometimes. That would have been a different movie.
Very kind of urban.
Yeah, very urban. King of New York.
You mentioned your thought, one of your favorite scenes from Psycho 3, but just quickly, your interpretation of, nothing compares to the original Psycho, and you can't.
They're all different animals.
There's I think there's obviously, I love the sequels. I think there's things about Perkins' work in them that are worth celebrating. Before we started the show, we mentioned Bates Motel, the show. Just your basic thoughts as somebody that documented the original movie so well. Sequels, spinoffs, different versions. What are your thoughts on some of this stuff?
Well, I think for me it's fascinating that I guess I'm with Hitchcock. I mean, I felt like Psycho gave me everything I needed to know about. I I wasn't curious about those characters, any of them, living, those who survived and those who didn't. But I think it's fascinating that Norman Bates morphed into something bigger and even more resonant to the culture than merely an extraordinary character in one film. Hitchcock never had that in any other, any others of his films, and very few directors and screenwriters do. So, I think that's fascinating. And as I said, I've copped to the fact that I've yet to watch Bates Motel. And, that has to do with a lot of complicated reasons. But one of them is that I grew up really not watching television. I read and saw movies. So lately now I've been seeing a lot of TV series because I'm going to be writing for TV, and I'm looking at how a show is created, and then how you build, and how you build the world, and what you do in season 3 when you're up against the wall. So I'm looking at them, and I'm taking them apart in a really different way. But I've been told by so many people who really know me well and know what pisses me off that I'll be fine with Bates Motel, that I won't hate it. I might not necessarily love it, but I will see that they're, from what I understand, they're on a different tear. They're in different territory.
Yeah,
and
definitely,
and that will interest me. And also, I'm crazy about Vera. I think she's a great actress.
She's also animating a character that hadn't actually really been explored.
Yes,
and she gives it a whole different life.
Yes,
yeah.
I don't know if it's definitely not the same character as Psycho 4. That's a different worldview, but I love her as a character on this. I think she's this really adoring mother, but a mother who's got a lot of problems she's trying to juggle and trying to shelter him at the same time, and trying to hide issues that might be with him. So all of those factors make her very complicated being.
Yeah. Well, I mean it when I say I really do.
That is the main reason to watch it. Yeah. Actually, he's good too. Together, they're good.
I think, I mean, you think like nobody's ever going to top Perkins or even come close. Freddie Highmore's really, really good. He's a really good Norman Bates, and I'm very impressed with the acting. And again, we were saying that the show's great when it's about them. They deviate into trying to loop into all these weird characters in the town. And anytime it goes into that stuff, that's when you start to get a little. But anytime it's those two, it's fantastic.
I just have so many TV series in me to watch. So I was addicted to Mad Men, and I watched Walking Dead, and I love The Good Wife, and a lot of shows that I had to be dragged kicking and screaming to watch. So I'm assuming that Bates Motel, there'll be something for me either to find interesting, or to mock, or to fall in love with. And I know that Vera Farmiga will be. I've never seen a performance of hers that I didn't think was extraordinary.
What it's missing that the shows you just talked about have, though, is that you don't feel like, I can't miss the next one. Yeah. The shows you're talking about were True Detective. It's like, I can't miss the next one. Exactly. I've never felt that with Bates. I'm like, you could probably miss the whole thing and then watch it years from, you know what I mean? It doesn't have that essential.
Like I want to see Orange is the New Black while I'm sitting here.
Right.
So I don't know whether I'll have that reaction.
You could have watched 4 episodes in the time that you've been sitting.
I probably could have.
Isn't that incredible?
Look at all those sketches you've done.
So, yeah. I do it without even realizing it half the time.
Alrighty, well, that was our epic Psycho.
And we could have gone for another hour easily on our end.
I wanted to get your report on Psycho 4, so we're going to have to get that next week.
All I will say is that I did enjoy it. It was fun, but it's definitely, the setup is so contrived that I struggled to believe anything I was watching. I mean, the calling into the radio show and all that, I was like, all right, this is very much a movie setup. The actual performances and stuff, and the reason he was going through that, Norman Bates, I thought was very interesting. I liked him emotionally. What the story was about was actually quite touching. His care for the future generations of Bates. Right. But I think number 2 is a really good movie on its own.
I love 3.
And I think 3 is really well directed.
I
think Perkins does a great job directing that film. I think it's a really fun Hitchcock ode.
It is.
But it's, but 2, it just is the standalone it's a really interesting story, I think. But anyway, we can do that another time. It's I have to say, we've done how many shows now? 70 shows. In all honesty, that for me personally, this was the most interesting we've done. I've got to say, you as a guest, I'm just like, this is the kind of stuff I love to hear, little nuggets from cinema history and Hitchcock. So
thank you. That was
thrilling for me. Yeah. So thanks guys.
Well,
I'm a nerd.
I love to leave people thrilled.
You did.
Thank you to Stephen Rebello. You can pick up the book Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho on Amazon. There's an audio version of it, which I
and don't worry,
10 hours long.
I don't narrate it. A professional does.
And do you have you briefly mentioned television, but is there anything we can look forward to soon that you can talk about?
I don't know about soon. I've optioned a thriller, a British novel that I'm doing the screenplay for, and I'm going to be producing it with one of the producers of Hitchcock.
Oh, great.
Nice.
One that I'm still talking to.
And that's how
Just
Hollywood works.
And watch Hitchcock and tell us what you think of that. Because and if you can watch The Girl as well, and it would be interesting to compare Hitchcock's performances. Also, I'm always curious.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. We'll see you next week, which I think will be our medical malpractice episode.
Malpractice
I believe.
Yes.
Hopefully.
Giggle,
I'm excited.
See you then.